All right, Mila, did you want to give any kind of introduction or you just want to just head into it?
I just want to say welcome, and Jim and Dave, take us away.
All right, sounds good. So your check-in tonight, who are you? Position in district, how are you? Time constraints, who's missing, issues, elephants, expectations, and then in the spirit of almost being Christmas, do you consider yourself a shopper, yes or no? And we're going to start with Heather Grecius tonight.
Because I made that face.
Yeah, I saw it too.
I'm Heather Grecius. I'm the Director of Elementary for Student Support Services. I'm great today. I have my new home office set up, so I even brought my chair home so I'm comfortable. I have the same expectations as I always do, that we will do great work tonight. I have no time constraints. And yes, I'm a shopper. I've already completed my daughter's Christmas list and gotten it delivered. And I just have a couple more for my family, my parents, but that's it. I'm good.
Wow. I started with the right person, Marty.
Marty McCarthy, principal at Thornton Middle School. Doing fine. Looking forward to this. And I think I would like to say I'm not a shopper, but I am. Like, I like to buy myself stuff, like fishing stuff and snowboarding stuff and hunting stuff. And then I do like buying gifts for other people. It's fun. I'm not sure I like it online though. like I was like, one of the pleasant things about being an educator is, often you have that week before Christmas off, or you have a few days before Christmas off. And I really used to like to go to the mall or shopping at night, on a cold, right before Christmas. It's kind of exciting. And well, probably won't do that this year, but that's, I guess I'm a shopper.
Sounds good. Kathy.
Hi, everybody. Kathy Plummer on the board. I'm pretty good. Expectations. I'm not sure what we're doing today, but I'm sure we'll do it. I have no time constraints, and I'd have to say, I guess I'm a shopper. I hate clothes shopping, but I like other kind of shopping, and I like shopping for other people.
Very good. Laura. Is Laura Mitchell on?
Laura Mitchell is not. She is out of town.
All right. Thank you. Dave Lockley.
Good afternoon, Dave Lockley, president of DTA. I'm doing well today. Just trucking along. We have Allison and Shelly and Laura are missing today. Allison and I are doing some troubleshooting, getting her on. So hopefully she'll get in just a second. Shelly will not be here today. My expectations is to have some really good conversations about how we're going to do our business this year and kind of set the stage for some big projects that we have to deal with in this current space. And I'm being bad and forgot to pay attention to all the questions. So I'll just go with the last one now and say I am not a shopper. I purchase things, right? Like I think of what I want and then I find it and then I purchase it. I don't like to spend time looking for things. I strategically purchase items.
Laura Leppi.
There we go. Woo. Hi, I'm Laura Leppi. I teach middle school math at Holstrom. I'm doing great because I'm in my favorite place, which is my classroom. And I don't have any time constraints anymore. I was in math tutoring. That's why I'm still here, because there was no time to leave. And we know who's missing. And I am the shopper of all shoppers. But not only, like, I literally just took this out of the box, got a brand new keyboard from Amazon. I have 3 of them because I have to decide. So not only am I a shopper, but I'm a returner. because I love buying multiples. Like online, I'll order all the sizes I think I might need, and then I will take them back, but I will not shop anywhere other than Amazon that doesn't have a physical store anymore, because I like taking it back to the store and not shipping. But I hate Christmas. I think Santa's judgmental, and I don't like December. I hate when people tell me Happy Christmas. I like Happy Christmas because it's European. But anyway, I like winter break. I don't like Christmas.
Nancy.
How do you follow that?
Yeah, no kidding.
I'm Nancy Leonard. I'm a retired principal from Adams 12. I'm feeling good. I don't have any time constraints. We know the 3 people, well, now 2 people are missing because Allison made it on. I don't have any issues or elephants. I'm expecting to hear how things are going since I'm not present at the district a lot. I'm interested to see what's going on and what the issues are. I don't particularly like shopping. I particularly don't like shopping online. I would rather be in a physical store. But I've bought 5 Christmas presents this week, so I guess I'm kind of a shopper. How's that?
All right. Dorman.
I am Dorman Land. I teach at Century Middle School. I am exhausted, overwhelmed, at the end of my rope. I expect that we'll do great work. I have no time constraints. I do not shop, and I have no issues in elephants either.
All right, Kristen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Powers, principal at Riverdale Elementary. I'm doing great today. My expectations would be that we do great work together, and I don't have any time constraints, and I am definitely a shopper. I love shopping, especially around the holidays, and I'm trying to limit that to mostly online now, but I think I'm definitely going to miss being in the shops with the Christmas music and cocoa and stuff like that. And I have 4 teenagers now that I'm shopping for. So that's new for me and a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward to it.
All right, Linda.
I'm Linda Walther. I'm a retired teacher and counselor from the district. I'm fine, thank you. I have no issues or elephants, and I used to be a great shopper, but not so much anymore.
Sandy.
Hi, Sandy Sorensen, North Glen High School Science. I'm glad to be back. I know we've got the world's problems to solve, including, probably world peace or something, but if we can't figure it out, then no one can. So I'm excited to be here tonight. I don't have any time constraints. I have no issues or elephants. And shopping, I'm so conflicted about shopping. I don't really like it, but I don't mind buying someone something if like it's their birthday or something. But I spend a lot of time thinking about what to buy them. I don't go shop and wander around. I hate that. And I teach environmental science. So we have the whole extraction, production, distribution, consumption, disposal, materials economy that is in my brain constantly. And so I just hate getting stuff. I just think it's unnecessary most of the time. So I don't shop much.
Matt.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Schmidt. I'm the principal at Pathways. I'm doing fine today. No issues or elephants. Obviously, my expectations are that we lay the groundwork for whatever work we're going to be doing this exciting season. Let's see here. Shopping, yeah, I'm good to shop. Kind of depends. I actually don't love it around the holidays just because of all the people, and there's like a lot of pressure on like what you're supposed to do for certain people. It's pretty chill otherwise. I don't mind it. I'm like I don't mind online shopping, but I'm with, I think it was Laura, like I can't stand returning things. I can't take it. Like that whole process of putting something back in its original package and then taking it to the post office or UPS like that. I just, no, I can't stand the hassle. So I try to really, if it's going to come online, I really hope that it's what I wanted originally. So I'd rather be out and about. But definitely not starting it. All of you guys talking about all this, like that just kind of stresses me out. I don't like to even think about it until after I eat some turkey and watch some football.
Mila.
Yeah, hi. I'm Mila Shepard. I serve the district as the Chief of Human Resources, and I have an expectation that we will line out the work for the year, get caught up on what's happening currently, and figure out where we're going from here. And no issues or elephants. And yeah, I'm a shopper. Usually though, hooked to an opportunity to eat and have some beverages and make it a whole experience. So the online thing does not do it for me.
Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Alter. I teach social studies at Horizon High School, and I am okay. I have an afternoon, like the morning was super chill, and then the afternoon, something happened in my sociology class with the kids. So then it was like counseling office and parent phone calls. And then I saw the alert come up for this and I was like, oh, that's at 4:30. And then it wasn't at 4:30. So sorry that I was late. And I also have something in the oven because I'm just like a hot mess. So I'm sorry, and I'm going to work on this. My expectations is that I'm going to pull myself together and focus on all of this. And what am I forgetting?
Are you a shopper? Yes or no?
Oh, no. Well, no. I hate shopping unless I'm on vacation, and then I love shopping. And that's when my husband and I buy all of our Christmas presents and birthday presents for like the whole year. But I didn't go on vacation this summer, so now I have no presents for anyone, which is also now stressful. I don't know what I'm going to do about that.
All right. Teresa didn't make it on, right? Debra.
Hi, I'm Debra Blake. I teach special education at Arapahoe Ridge Elementary. I am well, surprisingly well, considering it was the first day of remote again for us. Things went more smoothly than I expected, had a last minute change in my schedule. So the two groups that had to flip, one made it, the other didn't, but that was a last minute conflict. So most kids showed up and on time. So, and stuff worked. So I'm feeling good. Expectations are to, get through everything we need to get through and solve the problems of the world. I like whoever said that. I think we can take on the world. No time constraints. Yes, I am a shopper, but I'm a moody shopper. I really have to be in the mood. And then I have the world's best time and I want that and I'm getting that for you and that would look great in your house. But I have to be in the mood, and clothing shopping, as most women know, you put one thing on that doesn't look good, you're done for the rest of the day. It's toast. So it depends on what I'm shopping for. So I'm moody, and I agree with Allison. When we're on vacation, I have a ball. So yeah, I'm a shopper.
All right, Heather E.
Heather Espinoza, second grade at Glen. I'm fine. I'm tired. Like that, stay back with our little friends online. Expectations are to do great things as always. I do have to go pick up a child at 8 o'clock from school. So I'll be taking you on the road. So there might be two of me for a little bit on here. No issues or elephants. I would say I'm a moody shopper. I have to be in the mood to go to the store, but I love online shopping, whether it's for groceries or Christmas gifts. I don't have to go anywhere. It's efficient. It's convenient. I'm all in on the online.
Very good. Colleen.
Hi, Colleen Gardner, Shadow Ridge Middle School, sixth grade math teacher. I'm doing okay today, a little tired, but today went pretty well, so I'll take it. We know who's missing, no issues or elephants. I expect us to just start our season off on the right note. It's kind of amazing to me that it's already the new season because I felt like we just left. Shopper. Well, my husband would say that I am a shopper because he's like, if you're going to shop for more that's on the list, I'm not going with you because you'll take forever. But my kids don't think I'm a shopper because they get underwear and socks for Christmas from Santa. And they're like, now that they're adults, they appreciate it. But as kids, they were like, this is a terrible gift from Santa. So depends on who you talk to.
Oh.
Good evening, everybody. Bo Fobert, serve the district as Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction. Doing well this evening. No issues, no elephants, same expectations as always. Shopping to me connotes some level of enjoyment or, I don't know, like an activity. I would say I am a consumer, somewhere between Dave and Marty. I love to get things for myself, things that I like. I'm happy to acquire them and they bring me great joy and I have no qualms about buying things for me. And if somebody gives me a list or tells me what they like, I'm happy to strategically and swiftly and as easily as possible go out and acquire it. But in my long list of things I enjoy in my life or that I would set aside time for, it would not be shopping.
Hey, Chris.
I'm Chris Gadowski, Superintendent. I'm doing well today too. Expectations for today, I have hopeful, optimistic expectations. I enjoy spending time with this group. I find folks here pay attention to the facts. They're curious and interested in learning more about situations, even if they perceive having all the information already. They're willing to listen to the story and to learn more and not to make judgments about things they're not certain about. And both of those pieces, paying attention to facts and not making assumptions and listening and learning, are quite a bit different than some of the constituents and stakeholders I've been working with of late. So I appreciate the setting and the approach that people take. No issues or elephants for me. We've talked about the folks who are missing. And in terms of shopping, the main shopping I like to do is grocery shopping. I don't know why I get into it, but I love doing it. I love to use coupons. Most other shopping I absolutely hate, but something about grocery shopping, I'm pushing that buggy around. I just love doing that every weekend.
Good. And Jim, it's good to have you back, my friend.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you very much. I'm Jim. I'm one of your facilitators. I appreciate your understanding, your kindness, and the generosity you've shown me in the last few months, and I greatly appreciate it. Biggest problem I have right now is my attention span. You know, when it's short, I will read Reader's Digest, and I can generally make it through much of a page. But when it's really short, I have to go back and reread that paragraph, and I can't remember how it started. And so I know my attention span is short then. But I'm working on that. It is getting better. So I appreciate you understanding. We've gone through who is missing. Expectations are, it's a full agenda. There's important issues on here. I think we'll make it through it. I don't have any issues or elephants. I don't have any time constraints. And a shopper, someone said, I don't remember, I'm a moody shopper. If I'm in the mood for shopping, I enjoy shopping. I enjoyed it in stores. I miss going in and just wandering around Home Depot or Lowe's, you know. Some of their stores, I'm just as happy I'm online looking at something if I need something from their store. So thank you very much.
And I'm Dave. I'm your other facilitator. I'm doing good tonight. I have no time constraints. We know who's missing. Have no issues or elephants and expectations. The same expectation I always have for you, that you just keep doing the good work that you've been doing and really stay with the process. I am not a shopper. I'm like Chris. I like to shop for groceries because I like to cook and I like to eat. So that's about the size of it. Other than that, my wife does all the shopping and she can have it. So we're good to go. All right. So first thing on the agenda looks like update on the learning model finance election results and implications. So Chris, you're on again.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So let me just start with finance as a starting place. This year, as you'll recall back when we were convening in the late spring and into the summer, we had fairly grave concerns about where we were going to be at in terms of budget. The budget stabilization factor was increased significantly as part of the 2020-21 budget. Fortunately, there was a fairly significant potential offset through two sources of federal funds that were part of past stimulus packages. One, Susie is sometimes called CRF funds, coronavirus relief funds. They're also commonly referred to as CARES Act funds. So that's one source of federal dollars that's come our way, largely through an executive order of Governor Polis that allocated about $500 million to K-12 education. And then there were some additional funds allocated through an acronym called ESSERS from the feds, a longer runway to spend those dollars. The CARES dollars have to be spent by December 31st of our current year. The ESSERS funds need to be spent, I believe, by the conclusion of next calendar year. And then in addition to those funds, we've subsequently received some additional funds that have been passed through from the Adams County Commissioners. Some of the largest counties in Colorado, I believe it was the 5 largest counties in Colorado by population, were allocated additional resources under the state share of these CARES dollars. And so Adams County has generously allocated supplemental funds to school districts within the Adams County jurisdiction. And there may be potential for us to get a third final installment of funds here in the next 45 days before we wrap up the school year. So those were all factors that were weighing on us fairly significantly. We also had concerns about what would happen with enrollment, concerns about ballot measures that were going to be on the November ballot. And so I'll try to bring you up to speed on all of those pieces. Enrollment has fared much worse than we had planned and projected. So as we were doing our budget last year, we were estimating that we would be down about 680 students for the 2020-21 school year. And that follows a couple of years of significant declines. We're in the space, as I believe you all know, that birth rates within our state and our country, but especially within most parts of our state, birth rates have declined in a fairly significant fashion from where they were 12 to 15 years ago. And then the second dynamic that we've seen pre-COVID is that when people have babies within Adams and Broomfield County, within Adams 12 boundaries, many of them are no longer there by the time the child enters kindergarten. So you look back about 15 years ago, and if you had 2,000 babies born, 5 years later, you had 2,000 kindergartners. It was pretty much a 1-to-1 ratio. What we see now is out of the 2,000 babies that you may have had then, there may be 1,500 babies now. So the birth rates decline in a fairly significant way. And out of those 1,500 babies, only 66% of them are still here with us by kindergarten. They've otherwise moved off to places where there is lower cost housing or different economic circumstances, is what we've concluded by that trend. So that's been a factor for a number of years. It started to accelerate the last 2 years before this one, as the impacts of the Great Recession and a further significant decline in birth rates hit us. So we were expecting the 680 to be down. It turns out that our actual number at this point is a total of 1,977 students down. So almost 1,400 students further down in terms of enrollment compared to what we had anticipated. The financial sting of that is mitigated because there's a part of the School Finance Act that allows you to average your enrollment, and you can average it anywhere over the last 2 years to the last 7 years, I think maybe the max. Currently, given the decline that we're seeing this year, we're doing a 5-year average. And so that buffers and mitigates some of the financial loss that we would other realize. It results in us being down 671 funded pupils for this school year compared to last year, and we're down about 418 kids compared to what we had budgeted on a funded pupil count basis for this year. Each of those students, we receive about $7,900 in funding. And so when you multiply 420 by 8,000, you get a deficit that's in excess of $4.3 million. So it's a significant hit. It's not unique to Adams 12, as I would have weekly meetings with superintendents throughout the region starting, well, we've been doing it all the way since March at this point. Others are indicating that they're seeing 2 to 5% declines in enrollment compared to their projections. And so that additional 1,377 to 1,400 students that were down compared to our projection, that's about 1,300. That's less than the 5% range that others are seeing. It's more in the ballpark of 4%. So we're very much typical to what other districts are seeing throughout the metro region in particular. Some of what we understand to be going on is there's a number of parents, especially with preschoolers, kindergartners, and first graders, where we see the most significant declines in enrollment, who have elected not to send their kids to school this year, either in person or through remote means. Some parents indicate that they are redshirting their kids and that they'd like for their student to start preschool or kindergarten next year, when they hope and believe and expect that the pandemic will have largely passed and that the impacts will no longer be there, that their children can have an in-person experience without mask wearing and some of the other restrictions that we currently have. And then there's a fairly significant number beyond those where we've made contact and they say we're just waiting for a year, that we frankly don't know for certain what the circumstances are. We do believe there are more families that are homeschooling their children and accessing homeschooling curricula to serve their children in that way. There are some that are engaging in learning pod, private learning pod supports, where you might hire an educator, a retired educator, and amongst 3 or 4 or 5 families, split the cost of that person and have them serve your children in somebody's home. There are some who have likely moved out of our district because of economic distress, and we've not been able to track them down. So those are some of the main factors that we see. There are some benefits to having fewer children in the environment in which we're in. One of them is that we had much lower class sizes at elementary, where we see the most acute reductions in enrollment compared to past years. And that helps you have smaller amounts of kids within a classroom who can be 3 feet or further apart from one another to meet physical distancing requirements. So that's one of the big benefits there. At the same time, as you offer both in-person and remote experiences to families, you need more staff. Because if you're only going to have maybe 20 kids in a typical elementary classroom, and that's really where we landed. Our average elementary class size, more than 51% of our elementary classes have less than 20 students present. If you do that, it's great in terms of physical distancing, and it's great in terms of teacher-student connection. But when we build our budgets around class sizes of up to 29 at 5th grade, 4th grade, 3rd grade, and we typically have class sizes in the mid to upper 20s in a number of grade levels in schools. If you're only 20 in person and the others are going to remote, it means that you need to have more educators. And so one of the additional expenses that we have this year is that we hired 50 additional educators to help support remote learning, largely at the elementary level, but not exclusively, so that we could have class sizes in the remote context that weren't too ginormous. There are some other districts that haven't gone down that path, and they have the same physical in-person parameters that I've described. And if you don't hire more staff for remote learning, I've heard of some colleague districts where you might have 60 students in an online section, and not just at the secondary level, but in some cases you can have numbers that large at the elementary level. We felt like that wasn't the right thing to do in terms of students and having enough attention of their their instructor, nor is it a fair thing to do to educators to have caseloads of that size. And so we've hired 50 teachers to help support that. We paid for a good chunk of that with FTE that we had in our enrollment reserve. I think we had about 27 FTE sitting in our enrollment reserve to help with class size relief, the elementary level largely for class size pressures. Because our enrollment came in so much lower, we didn't need to use the 27 FTE to bleed down class size in person. And so we largely used those 27 plus another 23 that we've used from other funding sources to help us staff up in an appropriate way in the remote setting. And yet, even as I say that, I know one of the topics we'll be discussing either tonight or very soon are some of the disparities between in-person and remote class size loads for educators in our system, and how should we address that. But we've done our best to try to take the edge off. The last I heard, Mila may have more up-to-date information. We struggled, as you would expect, to hire additional educators. For a lot of reasons, the supply hasn't been all that robust for incoming educators for a couple of years. We continue to see fewer and fewer new candidates graduating from ed schools. And then with the coronavirus pandemic, there are fewer folks who have interest in doing that work, especially at the start of the year when there was a lot of worry and angst about the risk posed of being in an in-person setting. And finally, we're not really in a great spot of getting people to work for us for even a year who are retired. Those individuals, whether it's coming in for a year to be a steady classroom educator or coming in to help as a substitute guest teacher, there's very little interest, comparatively speaking, amongst retirees to do that work as contrasted with what we've seen in the past. I believe, yeah, Mila has more data about that if it's helpful to the group, but those are some of the challenges we've had both in terms of enrollment and in terms of staffing and additional costs. So you kind of get whacked both ways. You get less revenue, excuse me, let me take a swig here. So you get less revenue because you have fewer kids and you need more staff because you need to have smaller class sizes. That's really the long and the short of it. And it's frankly one of the things that's tricky for us to figure out moving forward as we look at 21-22 is how many of the kids will come back who didn't participate this year. If someone didn't participate this year, will they come back as kindergarten next year because they weren't in kindergarten this year? Or will they have, through other means, completed kindergarten through learning pods, homeschooling, online curricula, and show up as first graders? So the projection work is going to be very complicated. It is very complicated for Matt Schaefer and others who do that for us. And finally, there will be some significant potential budget implications for us and some staffing reductions that we might have to consider depending on where our enrollment forecasts come in for next year. And that will also be intertwined with what is going on with COVID as we get into the spring and the fall. What kinds of restrictions might we have in terms of class size? What requirements might we have for physical distancing? How many of our students and families still have interest in remote, even if some of the COVID restrictions get dialed back a bit? So the future planning exercise around enrollment and staffing will be complicated. And I should have more information for you as we get into 2021. But like a lot of things last year, I would project that a lot of our budget planning for next year will be later in the cycle than we typically like to do, because the legislative decision-making will probably take quite a bit of time. They're going to need more time than typical to make some commitments to K-12. We're going to need more time to tease out what's going on with enrollment. And then we'll need more time in here to talk about things like compensation and staffing reductions. So that's how I would frame that part of it. Because of some of what I've described, not only are some of the additional expenses around staffing, there's a whole lot of additional expenses for things that are fairly obvious, like personal protective equipment, mask, and things of that sort. There's quite a bit of additional expense that we've incurred for things like Florida Virtual Academy. My recollection, I've not looked at that data for a while, is that we spent in the ballpark of $870,000 to try to get access to Florida Virtual Academy licenses for all students. And that was something that once you got past a certain threshold, maybe a few thousand kids, it made sense just to have licenses for everyone because you weren't paying any additional money to have that sort of flexibility. So we did it there. There's also specialty online curricula that we've purchased for ELLs, some specialty curricula for things like music education. Bo can give you some more information about that as needed, but there's a fair bit of additional expense there. And so as you start to add up less revenue and more expense, thank God for the federal funding, because we've received in the aggregate at this point about $26.8 million in federal funding. A lot of that through the initial CRF CARES Act allocation that came directly to us in May. There's another 2 to 3 million that we had in the ESSERS funds. And then the rest of that 26.8 million comes from the 2 allocations we've received from the Adams County Commissioners. I expect on Wednesday evening, tomorrow evening at our board meeting, that we'll have the board consider and I hope ratify the expenditure of about another $2 to $2.5 million in funds that could be utilized to support live streaming methodology at the secondary level for second semester of this year. We know that one of the takeaway lessons from the time we were in person with students at the secondary level is that teachers were blown out by having kids in person with them. So you had half of your kids with you in person Monday, Tuesday, the other half Thursday, Friday. When kids weren't with you, they were asynchronous online. And so you had your group in front of you, the group that you were having to plan for and pay attention to who were asynchronous. Some of you, many of you were also tasked with teaching a class through remote means or maybe in a hybrid structure if it was a class that we couldn't fully accommodate and staff through either in-person or remote means. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was the number of kids in quarantine and the frequency of quarantines and trying to tend to the students who were quickly exiting out of your classes for 14 days. As we've had discussions with principals and educators through groups like our Onward Committee, and then a whole lot of focus group activity that's gone on at the high school level with staff and parents and students over the last week to 10 days, we're hearing a lot of positive feedback about live streaming as a way to teach the kids in front of you. The cohort who's at their stay-at-home days can watch through a feed into the classroom. It feels like the level of engagement will be much higher for students on those stay-at-home days. The level of having to plan so many different things for educators we expect would be lessened. And we feel like it's not too much screen time with that sort of approach. We'll be presenting all of that data and feedback from the various stakeholders to the board tomorrow night. But assuming that they see promise in this, even though there might be some final details to be decided and figured out before we exit for the winter break, we would then move forward with about $2 to $2.5 million of expenditures for things largely like laptops. We know that Chromebooks don't support remote learning very effectively, especially when you're having two-way interactions with students through Zoom or Google Meet. There's just not enough horsepower in a Chromebook to do that. And you need the supercharged capacity that comes with a laptop to be effective in that space. And so a good bit of that $2 to $2.5 million would be for laptops. There would also be some additional wiring that we would do to support amplification, audio amplification within classrooms, because we know one of the struggles that students sometimes have had in the live streaming we've done thus far, because we've had some educators doing that this fall, that it's often really difficult for kids to hear at home the educator in the classroom, especially if that educator is walking around the classroom, going to visit a small group of students in the back corner. And so additional amplification would be important. There's also some TBD items, at least the last I talked to Priscilla, that we want more feedback from educators about. And they include things like document cameras, I think webcams. We just want to know, are those tools and resources that people find to be of high value or not? And so that's why about $500,000 worth of that expenditure is a TBD, because we want to give people the tools that they want. We also want to be mindful that we're not purchasing things that folks feel like are unnecessary or that they won't use. And so we'll have that sorted out in the weeks ahead. What I've shared with the board is, regardless of whether live streaming were to be the path forward, there's still a lot of value in us having laptops in the hands of more educators in our system, because there are obvious limitations that have been exposed to Chromebooks through remote learning, both in the spring and this fall. And there's also long-term benefits in having amplification in more of our classrooms. The three places that really need much more of it than they have are Legacy, Mountain Range, and Shadow Ridge. And so those would be the three buildings where a lot of those investments would be made in terms of amplification. Funding source for this, $2 to $2.5 million. One possibility is that we might get up to $1.5 million from Adams County through a final third installment of CARES Act dollars. Susie has submitted the request and documentation to them. I'm hopeful that we'll know in the next week to 10 days whether that's approved. If so, we'll need to spend it by December 31st, and we will be able to do that. If that doesn't pan out, it's most likely that we would look at remaining funds in our 2016 bond program to pay for these kinds of investments. As you'll recall, the 2016 bond included commitments to technology upgrades throughout our system, as well as instructional upgrades that were largely tech focused, but not exclusively so. And buildings had some discretion about how to apply those dollars within their building. We're getting closer to the conclusion of the 2016 bond program, and we do have a couple $1 million left at this point that we expect to be there even after we finish this coming summer's work. So that would be another potential funding source. And if not, we would look to things like unassigned fund balance and or the general fund to make up any difference. But we're pretty darn optimistic that we're not going to need to draw upon general fund to make these investments to support remote learning and a live streaming approach for second semester. So in terms of money, probably lost in the sea of all this rambling and numbers is, what is the bottom line? The bottom line is currently we've deficit spent about $1 million out of our reserves for the current school year. And that's a frankly really good spot to be in when you're down as many kids as we are and you've had as many additional unplanned expenses as we've had. At the same time, there tend to be much more optimistic projections about what 21-22 looks like from the governor and from the state offices that do budget analysis and planning. There are two different offices at the state level that do budget planning. One is connected to the governor's office. The other is through the legislature's office. Both of them at this point believe that the economy has recovered much more than they had anticipated back in May and June of last year when the state was finalizing its budget. And at this point, if things continue the way that they're expecting, the increase in the budget stabilization factor that was made for 2021, our current budget year, they would see getting eliminated, and we'd go back to the BS factor level that we had prior to this current school year. And so it's largely a pretty optimistic prediction of the future at this point. I say that with you all with hopes that it remains optimistic, and also with the ask that we all not get too excited at this early juncture about where we might be at come March, April, May, and June as we deal with largely compensation issues in the system. There's still a lot that can change. I think many of you know that there were some greater restrictions announced by the governor today around economic activity, a number of counties moving to a different level of restriction restaurants in those counties will be closed. And so I think there's still a lot of uncertainty and some things that may not prove to be as good on the economy over the next few months as what they had anticipated in the last forecast. So at this point, $1.1 million ballpark out of reserves. You may recall that we modeled a few different scenarios last year about how we might use reserves before we knew of the federal money coming our way to help cushion some of the economic challenges that we were facing. One of the ideas that I proposed to the Board of Education was a 40-40-20 3-year drawdown of unassigned fund balance from the general fund. And under that scenario, my recollection was that the first year we would draw about $11 million out of reserves to help balance the books, another $11 million or so the next year, and then about $5 million in the third year. And then we would then be out of all of the discretionary reserves that we currently have under Board of Education policy. We weren't having to do that because of the federal funds. And so instead of drawing out $11 million, we're currently in a place of spending $1 million that we hadn't planned for the current year. We've also spent money that we had hoped to not spend until 21-22 on the federal side this year. And so at this point, I think just having a general sense of how some of these things are breaking is useful. But the bottom line is the most important variable for us, as it always is, will be the state of the state economy as we head into next year and what does K-12 funding look like. Beyond an improved economy, there are 2 election outcomes. Actually, there's multiple election outcomes that break different ways in terms of what it means for us for next year. So in terms of a positive move, voters adopted the measure that would repeal the Gallagher formula. And so the good news from that is that the rate of residential assessment will not get ratcheted down from its current level of 7.15%, I believe is that number. And by leaving that steady, and with home values continuing to escalate in a fairly significant fashion, it's likely that residential assessments for schools will generate more dollars, and that will reduce the amount of funding that the state has to provide to get us up to these per pupil amounts. So the Gallagher repeal is a positive. On the greater challenge piece, voters also approved a reduction in the state income tax by 0.05%. And that has, I'm thinking, I've read about $150 million negative impact to the state budget. And so that's a factor that can complicate the state budget balancing as they look not only at K-12, higher ed, health and human services needs. They'll have $150 million roughly less because of the income tax reduction to be using in future years. Voters also passed a measure that requires voter approval for any sort of fee changes by the legislature that have sometimes been used in the past as a positive budget balancing tool when it comes to K-12. The one that I think most of us may remember is the hospital provider fee, and they changed some of the accounting for that at the state budget a couple years ago, and that was tremendously helpful in preserving money that could be allocated to K-12 and not getting into Tabor refunds. And so that change, I think, largely takes away some legislative flexibility, and to the extent there are other fee revenue sources in the future, voters have largely seemed disinclined to vote yes to things in the fiscal space at the state level. And so I think that's largely something that's a negative. And I thought there was a fourth one floating around in my head. If Kathy or somebody else on this call can think of anything else.
Are you thinking the family leave tax, that one?
There you go. That's it. So there is a family leave tax that voters approved. And I really don't have a lot of nitty-gritty detail on it yet. Mila, I know, is looking to gather more information about that. I believe Dave and CEA and others are studying it more closely too. I would foresee in a future IBS meeting that we'll have updated information there. I've seen things in the ballot language and in some of the materials that talk about exempting local government institutions from complying with that act, but I think there's just a whole lot of complicated detail and unanswered questions about it. It may or may not have impacts for us financially. I also feel like even if there are some potential financial impacts, there's some delayed implementation around this act, and so it's not likely to be something that will have a financial impact for next year's 21-22 planning. I always get the letters and numbers. I just can't translate any of them anymore. So I've talked about Gallagher income tax, voter approval for fee accounting changes, and the family leave. If there's something beyond that, that is EE or something relevant, I'd invite you to jump in, Kathy.
That's the vaping tax. So for the first 2 years, there's something that comes to schools. I don't know if it goes to the education fund or if it'll come to us, but there is a few years where money doesn't just go to preschool, but it does come to K-12. So I don't know if there's any indication about how that money will be allocated or if we'll see any benefit from that.
Yeah, thanks for adding that in, Kathy. So the big 3 or 4 variables that we will continue to have more refined information about. One is, what are we anticipating about enrollment? We try to nail that down in January of each year. By late January, we may need to slow that down. Given the current circumstances, I think a lot of family choices, especially for young kids, will be dependent upon what they see with COVID restrictions, school district plans about how they would operate in the fall, prevalence and distribution of a vaccine. And so I'd like to wait as long as we possibly can to make enrollment decisions. As I said, I think the legislative piece, as you look at the ins and outs we've just described, from things like Gallagher and vaping and income tax, and then just the general economy, it's going to take the legislature some time to sort that piece out as well. And then frankly, on our own side, I think we're going to need some time to assess the COVID situation too. If we still have the scale of students wanting remote education as we have this year, or if we have the same physical distancing rules that we have this year, that bears upon how many staff we need, how much PPE we need, how much continued online curriculum, at what breadth and quantity. And so I guess one of the final takeaways for me is the more time we can give ourselves and the more patience we can have to nail down budgets, both at the district level and the building level for next year, that will serve us well. I know I've covered a lot of ground. I've done a lot of talking. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm also happy to pontificate about COVID and the governor's press conference from today and some of the frustration I have about some of the messages there, if that's of interest to anybody.
So while you got give you a little bit of a break here, Chris, I see Teresa just popped in, and so we need to have her check in. Teresa, it's who are you, position in district, how are you, time constraints, issues, elephants, expectations, and then are you a shopper, yes or no?
All right. Let's see if I can remember that. Teresa Barajas, assistant principal at North Glen Middle School. I'm doing okay. Have a couple family members down with COVID, and so just trying to process that with them, as well as, of course, some of our staff members. What was the next question?
Time constraints. Do you have any time constraints between now and then?
No, and thank you for letting me arrive late. I appreciate that. And if I'm a shopper, of course I'm a shopper. So I try to stay off Amazon. It's helpful that the stores are packed right now because I'm trying to avoid stores. So if I stay off Amazon, I'm good.
Very good. Thanks, Teresa. All right. With that, any questions for Chris or desire to hear more about the governor's speech? Questions about that? Please put your hand up in your participants box if you've got it, or just wave at me vigorously and I'll do my best to see you.
Sandy posted in the chat asking what the governor said. I don't know if that's...
The core of what the governor said and the source of my frustration is repeatedly throughout his press conference talked about the interest in having students be in person in school now or very soon, and emphasized quite a bit K-5 students being in person. I think we all share that interest, but the urge to have students K-5 just ignores the reality of how pervasive the virus is within the entire region right now, and the operational impossibility of serving kids in person when you're having to quarantine so many students every time you have a positive case. So the most recent data, just for those of you who care about the numbers part of it, there was a time when all the public health officials at CDPHE and local public health agencies like Tri-County said that if you have more than 50 cases per 100,000 population over a 14-day period, they labeled that as high. If you were above 100, that was considered very high. We're now at 1,300 cases per 100,000 over a 2-week period in Adams County. And then in terms of positivity, you've probably seen various ways of measuring how much is worrisome. The World Health Organization has talked about sub 5% being ideal. The Metro Denver Partnership for Health set the standard at 7%. Beyond that, you were in the red category of high risk. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment developed a dial with various stages of community restriction, and when you're above 10%, they consider you to be high risk. At 15%, it called for stay-at-home orders, and we're currently at 16.1% in Adams County. So we've seen a dramatic acceleration of the virus from mid-September. In the course of 2 short months, we've gone from a rate in Adams County of 100, which is where we're about September 14th and 15th, to the 1,300 number of today. And just dealing with those positive cases, even if your quarantine standards are fairly narrow, would be challenging. But right now, because there are so many cases out there, the state guidance, the state requirements are that we quarantine not just students and staff who've been in close proximity to someone who tests positive, but everyone who's basically been in class with them over the prior 48 hours. And it was that piece of widespread quarantines of huge numbers of kids that were blowing out our schools on the eve of the elementary transition remote and making that announcement. We had 5 schools, trying to think of them all. So we had Stellar, Silver Creek, Rocky Mountain, Hunters Glen, Westview, Malley. I think I'm leaving out one school. So maybe it was 7 altogether that had 30% or more of their staff out on quarantine because of positive cases in the building. And so what frustrates me deeply about the governor's message, I do think we have more and more data that doesn't indicate that schools are risk-free. And I understand and respect that we have staff who have concerns for their personal health and safety and that of loved ones by teaching in person. I think the amount of in-person transmission we've seen throughout this first semester has been lower than I think many expected. And so that's a very positive place. And I get messaging that says the risks are quite a bit lower than most people anticipated in terms of transmission and somebody becoming ill. But they're not zero, number one. And then beyond that, there are just huge implications with the current CDPHE quarantine rules that when you have this number of people who are getting sick, you just can't have any consistency in how you operate your schools. So I'm frustrated by that. We started to receive messages from parents saying the governor said the safest place for kids to be is at school, especially young kids, and not at home, and that K-5 is a place that should be open. And when are you going to revisit your plans and change course? And the answer continues to be, because of quarantine parameters, that we will stay the course of doing remote instruction, even though I know and sensed, as Heather introduced herself today, that remote instruction for young children is incredibly frustrating, incredibly difficult, not nearly as productive as we want it to be. I understand all of those very real challenges, and yet I just don't think there's any possible way for us to do in-person instruction at any level, including K-5, in the circumstances that we have. So that's my summary of what the governor said, why it frustrates me, and how I see us moving forward from here.
Other questions for Chris?
Sorry, I had my hand up in the chat. Sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead.
So does Dorman too, that I noticed, by the way. But
thank you.
First of all, I have to say I'm happy to hear, Chris, that you're frustrated by that, because it's hard for teachers to think that they are going to go back in that situation also, for the most part. My question was, though, about last night. I watched the meeting you all had with ARs, and you said something about also being frustrated with, or something along the lines of being frustrated with the contradictory tone the health department is taking with their numbers with regard to how many cases per 100,000 we have, and their required criteria, however you want to call it, of like shutting things down, and they're not following their own advice on many occasions. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and why is that?
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. I guess when I checked in and Dave asked, how are you feeling? I should have said frustrated, because it sounds like I am expressing frustration in a variety of settings, and that is true. I am frustrated with public health because they've spent a lot of effort in developing these frameworks and these data-based transition points to guide how local governments, county governments, and school officials should be making decisions and measuring safety implications for either their institution or the broader community. And so it's frustrating when the current set of standards from CDPHE indicate that when you have 350 positive cases per 100,000 population over 14 days, or a positivity rate of in excess of 15%, that you should be in stay-at-home, shutdown status. And I also get that you don't want to immediately, once you get to 351 cases or 352 cases, say that we're shutting things down. There are huge implications for people's lives that go well beyond even economic considerations when you do things like stay-at-home orders. And so waiting a reasonable amount of time to see if those trends are stable or increasing or declining makes good sense. And yet we're now at a point where we've been beyond 350 cases per 100,000 in Adams County for more than 30 days. And we're now at 1,300. It just continues to grow. And I've advocated in a variety of calls with public health officials, if you're not going to follow the standards that you set, then just repeal them, wipe them off, and basically say that if the standard's really going to be, we're going to keep things open until the hospitals are beyond their capacity, let's just say that's the standard, because it feels like it's become the de facto standard. But you still have these standards that say 350 takes you to stay at home. I just hate having things that we continue to put out there and that we don't follow. And then the other big frustration I have is, even within that framework, I think frankly, because of a lot of lobbying from superintendents and school boards under this principle of local control, we also have, even within stay at home, things that say remote is suggested, but nothing that ever says that remote instruction is required in K-12 instruction. And because of that, you've all likely seen, I know educators compare notes about who's in person versus remote, and who from the perception of staff is best protecting safety interests of their staff between the various school districts on the Front Range. And then you have parents doing the same thing, who's staying in person the longest and who's most committed to meeting the needs of kids. And so it's your worst nightmare. We do a better job on snow days as superintendents and school districts and having consistency in how we manage it than we have in managing the coronavirus, when I would argue the stakes are much, much more significant. And so I'm frustrated with this idea that school districts, that I should have more authority and power, or that Kathy, Laura, and colleagues should have more power and authority to decide what we do with schools than the governor, than the director of the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and the director of Tri-County Health, and a variety of other institutions. It just doesn't feel like we are so smart and expert about public health matters as educators, administrators, and board members that we got to be like God Almighty and making decisions to stay in person no matter what the numbers and no matter what it says for other kinds of institutions going on. So frustrated by that. And obviously I'm not terribly shy about saying in a variety of public settings, including this one.
Okay, Dorman.
I appreciate your candor, Chris, and telling us where we stand. It helps a lot. My question is, considering the new learning model that we were talking about within the financial aspect, the laptops and webcams, or maybe a simulcast type of classroom, and combining with the numbers that we have now and that we might have or not in the new semester, does the new learning model, because I just have it in my imagination, but does the new learning model, or proceeding in that direction, is that going to allow us to stay open in a better manner?
Yeah, great question, Dorman, and we strongly believe the answer is yes. So one of the benefits to doing that, it's a yes, and it's also a depends matter, a question. I think there's benefits in that model if we get the virus rates to be lower, or we can get quarantine standards to be less burdensome than they currently are. If we still have rates of 1,300, and if we continue to have, what was the other part? Oh, the quarantine rules that we have now, we'll still be blowing kids out on quarantine and staff fairly often. The only potential benefit is if an educator gets sent out in that context, you'll have more kids, you'll have your whole class kind of norm to doing some remote instruction because they'll be doing it half of the week anyhow. And so long as the educator's not ill, they can take the instruction that they're doing in the classroom and serve all of their kids remote for that 14-day period. So we feel like there's probably some greater level of continuity that we can provide there. In the end, the most important things are for the virus numbers to come down, the quarantine rules to change. The biggest driver behind this live streaming approach is really looking at educators and students and just having fewer things going on at one time that you're trying to plan for and manage. Because it just felt like there were too many kids in too many different places, and it was frustrating for both students and staff to make that work.
Heather Espinoza.
So I have a question, Chris. I just wanted to say, myself and my elementary colleagues across the district, we have practiced when we were in person with our students. We have trained them how to be online. We have popped quiz them of where's our Zoom link and where do we find our reading activities and where do we go for math? And we have done these things to better equip them. So when we did go home, they would feel more confident and be more successful learners. We are learning. It is exhausting, but we are learning and these students are moving forward. So thank you for making the hard but right decisions for our students and our colleagues in the district.
Thank you, Heather. That's great to hear that kids are heading into this latest round of remote much better prepared and more confident. Thank you to you and your colleagues for making that happen.
Other questions? So you have been at it now for about an hour and 15 minutes. Do you want to take a short break before we move on to the update from Dave and Mila, or do you want to do the update and then take a quick break? Which do you prefer?
I think the update, because it should be relatively short, and then doing a break before taking off. I have to go tell the children to be quiet. Give me 1 second. Sorry.
All right, no problem, Dave. So Mila, do you want to start with the?
I'll take it. While Dave talks to little ones in his kitchen. So we wanted to give you a little bit of an update on just a structural mechanism that's part of our Zoom setup here. And in the share drive, you'll see a document called Zoom Straw Design Groups. And Dave and I have gone ahead and assigned 3 straw design groups. And the reason we're doing this, and these will be our groups for a while, and we can change them up as we go if we need a little bit of variety. But basically, we took another look at the open meetings law, and really all parts of meetings where you are discussing a collective bargaining agreement, and whenever there are more than 2 board members and members of the administration present with members of an association, you really need to be open to the public. And so our former structure of breaking out into Zoom rooms from this main meeting really wasn't meeting the requirements of that law. And so we did some thinking, and we did some brainstorming and tried to find a solution that, we considered things like, well, we don't break out into straw design groups. We just do all of our brainstorming and creation here as a large group. And we thought that really missed something. It's easier. We really appreciate and value every voice, and it's so much more productive when you're in a group of 5 or 6 to have that voice really heard and contributing to the conversations and the idea making. We considered other ways of doing this, but finally landed on we can assign a separate Zoom link that we can publish to the public, allowing members of the public to drop into any of these 3 straw design groups. And so by creating the straw design groups ahead of time and having a unique Zoom link identifier for each one of those allows the public the access that is required. And so Dave and I just wanted to make you aware of that tweak to our process in compliance with the law. And Dave, what did I leave out that we want to be sure? Oh, I know the way we're structuring those.
Yeah. So for you guys, once you go into the link, it won't seem any different. You'll see everybody on the screen. You'll be able to chat. You'll be able to talk, raise hand, all those features. The links themselves that will be posted for people to go to will send them to basically like a webinar style link where they can see, they can hear, but they can't participate. So it really would resemble the same thing as if we did have a guest in person and they were in the room and they were hovering over your shoulder or sitting right behind the breakout group where they can hear, they can see, but they can't participate per our norms and process. So it just allows that similar like experience, keeping us within the guides of the open meetings law. So that would be the format there, just so it won't seem any different for you guys, but it will protect the process so we don't have anyone Zoom bombing us as you were of like trying to participate when it's not really their place.
And And so in order to do that, we had to identify three people to be like webinar hosts. And so that's me, and that's Dave. And then we've nominated the lovely and talented Heather Grecius to be our third webinar host. So that means that we three will never be in the same straw design group. And as hosts, we have the ability to choose who gets to be a participating member and who does not. So, so anyway, that's just how we've got it set up for now. And if we have a need to break into straw design groups, we're ready. You can see the rostering of our membership into those three groups for now. And like I said, we can change that if at any point down the road it needs a little mix up. But does anybody have any questions about that little gem?
So Mila, do you plan on using this one for quite a while, for tonight only, or you're going to wait and see?
I think we thought we'd use it for the next couple meetings at least, or the next couple times that we have to do straw design, and then ask you all for your pleasure. We could stick with it for the whole year if that was okay, but we can decide.
And really, the piece, the rostering is just so that we can get people the right links in advance. So it would be difficult to do it mid-meeting changing, but in between meetings, since the links are what they are, it would be less troublesome in between sessions to adjust just members of the group. It's just during the individual day of it is difficult to make sure everybody gets the right information.
Allison.
This is more, I guess, just a curiosity. Are these recorded or just live streamed? Like, can people go back and watch them at any time?
So we will not be recording the breakout sessions. So like I said, as far as the practice, just like our old breakout sessions, there's no legal requirement for them to be recorded, just that the public, if they so chose, could observe. And so these main rooms will still continue to be on YouTube and recorded as they are now, but the breakout sessions will not, just like they weren't before. Like I said, the only pivot is that we have to leave one room to go to another so that we can allow them to observe without participating.
Okay. Anything else for Dave and Mila around this? Anything else, Dave or Mila, that you need to add? All right, Mila.
Yeah, I think we're after the break, we'll come back and I think we'll do some work.
All right.
Get into one of our issues.
Okay, sounds good. So 10 minutes, does that sound good enough? Okay, come back at 5:48 then, folks. You're on break.
Hey, Dave and Jim. I got a couple of questions from people about the process for the breakout rooms. So when we're ready, I just want to maybe clarify again before talking about our first topic.
Sounds good, Dave. We'll start with that. Got a few people that are still out, so we'll wait a few minutes. They're popping in now as we speak. So Dave, the only one I see out is Kathy. She may be there, just doesn't have her screen on. So there she is. If you want to go ahead and answer your questions.
Okay. So I got a couple of people texting me going.
Marty is still out. Marty is still out.
Okay. Well, Marty wasn't the one asking me questions, so I'm just going to keep going.
No, I'm just
Marty
eating.
can take care of himself. A couple of people texted me and asked, and said they didn't get it. They don't understand what it is that we're doing. And so basically, the open meeting law says that we need to allow the public to observe what is going on in the meeting. They don't have to be able to participate, but they have to be able to observe. And so we have been doing that by having this meeting broadcasted on the district's YouTube channel. And we will continue to do that. But what we came to was that we were not in compliance with the open meetings law during our breakout sessions because we had multiple members of administration and the EA talking about the contract with board members present. And those breakout sessions also needed to be in compliance with the open meetings law. And so to do that, we basically set up 3 separate Zoom meetings that we will use as breakouts. And the link will be posted on the YouTube channel, just like it says, like when we're on break or in breakouts. And people can choose to join those breakout sessions as observers, as participants, but not as speakers. So they won't be able to speak. They won't be able to participate in the conversation. They'll just be able to see what we are talking about. And so that way we are in compliance with the law without interrupting our process. So it's a little cumbersome at the beginning as we, go in and out of breakout sessions, but it was the only way to preserve our structure and still be in compliance with the law while we're having to be remote. So that was my.
Okay, Dave, you do have a question, Colleen.
So does this mean things are going to change when we go back in person? Because we've never had people follow us into breakout rooms to watch us do our breakout rooms in person. So does that mean that is also switching?
So
not that we'll ever be back in person this whole year, but it made me wonder, like they've never followed us to a breakout room. So
they did, but what we usually did was had them stay in, like if we were in one of the big conference rooms, they just stayed in the room, right? And they had the choice of wandering over and listening to whatever breakout session they wanted. That was always the case. We didn't kick them out of the room, right? And we had to tell them which rooms people were in if we were in. Now, caucus is different, right? If we choose to go into a caucus, then under the law, the district's caucus, I believe, and Mila can correct me if I'm wrong, but that one is observable, but the EA one is not. And so that won't change. It's one of those weird things where it's like, no one really came and hung out and watched our bargaining sessions very often, especially when we were in straw design phases. And so it doesn't seem like it is a problem, but when we had someone point out the letter of the law to us, we needed to make those correct adjustments. And I've noticed that, am I frozen to everyone else my picture? Because my picture is not moving on my own screen. So I can't tell.
Yeah,
no, okay.
no.
All right, good.
All right. Deborah, you had a question, I believe.
Will we be able to see them?
No. The host will be able to know if somebody else is there, and they could theoretically communicate with the host, but not with the participants. So you guys in the sessions. You'll probably, I'm not sure how Roddy will set it up. You may be able to see them as on the list of people who are there, but you won't physically see their picture if that's what you're asking.
Yeah,
the only people you'll see picture wise is the members of your group.
So not even a black box?
No, it would just be on the participants list on Zoom. They may appear as a name.
Other questions before we move forward? Okay, everybody good to go with that? And I'm sure like anything else new we've done, it'll be a little cumbersome at first. So be patient and I think we'll be fine. So, all right. So we are starting on remote learning class size. Mila, Dave, is there any background on this that we need to bring up before we start into story? I figured so. Go for it.
There's
Dave.
always background. So while I'm and Mila are chatting a little bit about remote learning and class sizes and whatnot, we did create a chart for today. There's going to be a remote learning folder, and then we have a chart for remote learning class size inside our shared drive. I did send the link to Dave and Jim. So Jim, it should be in your Gmail email address. I see Dave is already in it, so at least it partially worked. So this year we're going to be dealing a lot with remote learning as we potentially stand up either a separate online school, or at the very least, remote learning is here to stay. So we're going to have to deal with it and figure out how it impacts our contract, how does it not, and those kinds of issues. The first issue that has come up to us in the remote learning space is when we stood up remote learning and moved in person in September, we made a lot of conscious decisions about keeping in-person class sizes, as you heard Chris talk about, smaller. We made conscious decisions about keeping remote sizes smaller than some of our competitors, as it were, with 60 people classes. And I've heard some horror stories of 80 people classes in the remote learning space, and not band class. Although 80 people on a band Zoom also terrifies me. We made some conscious decisions about that because they were different, because they're a different class. We seemed to make sense at the time. Then we moved our secondaries into remote, and now our elementary schools are moved into remote, at least temporarily, both of them. There's a potential of us moving back in person. I know that's my goal, to someday be able to be back in person, not just because that would mean that my kids aren't running around while I'm trying to work, but because that's what's best for students and learning. But in this intermediate time where we have in-person students, people who had selected in person in remote classes, and people who are remote who are also still remote, we now have a huge disparity between class sizes. So if I had an in-person class of, I'm making up numbers right now, 25 or even 30 in my US history class, that same teacher in the same school teaching the same subject could have a remote class of 40 or 50. Right. So in our class size caseload language, there's stuff that talks about, looking and comparing classes and, making balances and dealing with inequities and all those kinds of issues. Well, we run into this position of what do we do with the fact that at least for the last couple of weeks in our remote and for the next couple of months until hopefully sometime in January, our secondaries have had this disbalance, and our elementaries, now that they are now all remote for the next at least month, hopefully back in person in January, they are also now in an obvious disbalanced position. And so that's the issue, is what do we need to do as a system to deal with, recognize, address this this disparity, this issue. Mila, is there anything you would add to that before opening it up either to questions or stories?
No, I don't think so. I was trying to capture just a couple of those basic background items on the chart language. I don't know if I'll be the scribe for the whole session. Maybe Jim or Dave, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, we can do that, but thank you for doing that, Mila. Jim, did you find the document? You're muted, Jim.
He might be muted, but I see him in the document, so he should be good to go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm in the document.
Okay, do you want to type, Jim, or do you want to run the show?
Let me go ahead and start typing, and then, as I drift off topic, you can correct me.
Sounds good. All right, so story, and I have Allison's hand up. Did you have a question, Allison, or were you just ready for the story? Go ahead, Allison.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Do we have an idea of like how many people there is that big of a discrepancy? Like, I'm just kind of curious about how big of an issue is this? Because I only know about it at my school.
So we're right now just finishing auditing the class size caseload. I'm sorry, not class size caseload, the face-to-face report. I must be tired. I can't even say the right word. The face-to-face report, which distinguishes between in-person and remote sections. It becomes very complicated at secondary because, and Jim can probably capture this, because a lot of people don't teach purely remote or purely in person. They might have 3 and 2 of whatever variety you want. And so it's taken some time to really drill down and get those reports ready, especially at the secondary, for who's in person and which specific section is in person and which specific section is remote. At the elementary level, it's because the teacher teaches just remote or just in person for the most part. It's a much cleaner process. And, as we look at those remote sections and in-person sections, they are bigger because of the physical distancing requirements that we put in. They're bigger. And so, is every single remote class in the district bigger than its in-person colleague? No. Are the majority of them bigger than their in-person colleague? Yes. My hope is that at our next IBS meeting, as we continue this topic, we should have the completed face-to-face report so that you will be able to see the exact numbers, including the in-person and remote sections. We have the face-to-face report. I can tell you exactly how many kids are in each section, but because of the complication of the remote, it's taken us longer to get to distinguishing in the secondary in-person, remote, and remote versus in-person.
Okay, Sandy, I see you putting a bunch of stuff into the chat, and I'm going to have you give it as part of the story for our document too, so that it's there. Do you want to say anything about it before you start into it? And I've got you and Colleen in the Colleen, was yours a question or did you have part of the story?
It's a question.
Okay, go ahead, Colleen.
Question. Yep.
I just wondered if you're going to disseminate information based on electives teachers or specials teachers and then core teachers, because I know there's some discrepancy in how many numbers electives have in their remote. So I didn't know if you are including those numbers.
So the report that's going to come out will be the section, the number of in-person, the number of remote, and in our classes that are in a weird hybrid where it's an in-person class, but it also has remote students in it, it will distinguish that group as well. And so it's going to be a pretty complex report with all the different classes, and it's not going to be clean and simple like it has been in the past. And so my short answer is I think it should be relatively yes.
I'm just asking if you will be able to tell between electives teachers, specials teachers, and other teachers who
Yes, because we'll know the exact course. The only thing we won't sometimes, it gets a little funky at the high school. What's an elective social studies class and what's a non-elective social studies class? So it gets a little complicated in those arenas. But as far as traditional electives versus traditional core classes, absolutely.
Okay. Kathy, is yours a question or part of story?
It's a question.
Go ahead.
Well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's part of story.
Could be. Go ahead and ask it as a question, and then we'll see if we need to put it in story.
So there's always been different sizes of classes, right? So are we trying to make it, because it's so much worse, we're talking about it? Or I guess I'm just trying to understand the magnitude, because if we've always had inequity, so I'm just trying to figure out how, what we're trying to solve for when we're going forward.
So maybe I'll put a little bit into story. It's a little bit more context, and then I think that may help. So how the class size caseload adjustments language has been done in the past is we look at similar courses in similar buildings across the system. So for example, I'm an 8th grade social studies teacher. We look at International School or Thornton Middle. We look at what are my 8th grade colleagues also teaching, the other 8th grade social studies teachers, what do their class sizes look like? And then we also look across the district. What do 8th grade social studies classrooms look like across the district? And that is part of the determination of is there an imbalance? An imbalance doesn't mean, like we break up kids or whatever. It's just a process to figure out, do we need to make an adjustment either in assistance, in moving kids around? It's a way of looking at the process. Now we have at Thornton, I don't actually know the numbers at Thornton, so Marty, maybe this is a bad example, sorry. But now we may have, so I'll use a Century example because I know this one better. At Century, at 8th grade social studies, in my 4 classes, I have 2 that are the same as my colleagues, and now 2 that are much more bigger than my colleagues because they are remote sections. But now that we are all actually remote, those courses are now all remote classes. And so now there's a disparity between me teaching remote classes and him teaching remote classes, because it's now the same type of class. So maybe I went from having my colleague maybe has 120 8th grade social studies, and I had now 150, 30 more, which could be considered a whole nother, like having a whole nother class worth of kids that I'm grading and working with. But I'm now doing the exact same job in the exact same building because we're both now remote teachers. Does that answer your question, Kathy?
Okay. Colleen, your hand's still up. Did you have more, or you forget to take your hand down?
I don't know how to take my hand down at this point because I can't even see myself in the participants list.
Okay.
I'll drop it. And I would
you.
love if we could move to story so it's less Dave talking and more other people.
Yeah, both Daves for that matter, Dave. So if you have part of the story, put your hand up in the participants box. It works best that way because then I can move down the line as we're going. So Sandy, I know you started some in the chat, so we're going to start with you. Go ahead, Sandy.
Okay, and whoever's charting, if you want to just shorten down what I said over in the chat for chart language, that's fine. But I just wanted to explain a little further. At Northglenn, because we have the STEM program, among many other things, but there's only certain teachers that are qualified to teach certain classes. Like there's human body systems, and it's all like P-Tech, B-Tech, it's all these crazy acronyms that go along with the STEM program. So when we were in person and kids were opting to stay online, and while some kids from that, like I said in the chat, cybersecurity class or that HBS class wanted to be remote, but others, chose in person. But there's only one teacher to teach one of those classes. So those teachers had to make lesson plans and stream in kids from online and then their ones in person every single day. So the workload was completely unbalanced. Also, I know that we had a forensic science teacher who she was the only online science teacher that was able to teach it. So there were like six sections of forensic science, something like that. So any forensic student from any other class that wanted to be remote had to be in her class because she was the only remote forensics teacher. So I think she still has upwards of like 48, maybe 52 kids in her one forensics class, even though we're all remote now. So now the other forensics classes are half the size, but she's still she has like 170 total students when, the rest of us only have, like 120 or 130. So.
Okay, Sandy, would you look at what Jim put? There's 2 that he wrote in there and see if he got it all or if there's something that you're missing. It's the last 2.
Yes, I think that sums it up just fine.
Okay, thank you. You bet. Thank you, Matt, and then Marty. Matt.
Yeah, so just if we start looking at this, I do think the actual numbers will be important to look at because I think anytime you're looking at course load, it's going to be important to look at the teacher's whole load versus just any particular class. And I've obviously, like Sandy's talking about, those specific situations are going to happen, especially in this particular nightmare of a life we're leading right now. But if we're going to start analyzing it, I do think it would be important to look at a total load versus like this class being so big versus the other. It's going to be really, numbers are going to matter if you're really going to dive into this.
Okay. Okay, would you look at that, Matt, and see if that's what you said?
I'm going to trust you right now. I've got the Google unhappy face on that document, so I'm guessing I need to close Chrome down, and I'm not sure if that's going to affect Zoom or not, because I'm trying not to be that techie.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Okay, Marty.
I guess some story, at least at the middle school level, this discrepancy where it exists became exacerbated because of when we started hybrid, we surveyed parents and created schedules based on that survey data. It became apparent even before we started remote, that parents were changing their mind. And so we got a massive shift to not massive, we got a significant shift to remote. So, faced with the choice of either, and it came in gradually, right? It wasn't like all of the parents said at once, we want to go to remote. So, slowly over the course of the time that we were in hybrid, we had more and more families choose the remote option, and it didn't really provide a good solution. Like, we had just changed every student's teacher 2 weeks ago, and doing it again in 2 weeks seemed like it would be really damaging to students. So, that's part of the story. And then I have another piece that I'm not sure is story or straw design or what. Can I just say it and then you can tell me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong?
go ahead and say it. And if it's an option, I'll have you hold it for the options. Okay. And I'll make a note that you said it. Okay, go ahead, Marty.
So I think some of the way that we're moving towards a more simultaneous experience for students will alleviate these problems and make it easier to balance schedules. If a student can access any teacher simultaneously online, then whether they switch models or whether they're in the remote setting now, doesn't preclude them to being in a different classroom. And so a lot of what Sandy was talking about is those specialty classes. We, in essence, because anyway, at Thornton, we had close to 40% of our students wanting remote, had to double every single one of those offerings, which really stretched staffing and made things really complicated. If you were able to teach simultaneously in-person students and remote students, you would not have to do that. And so that would eliminate a big pressure point that causes this issue. So
Marty, I think it is a little bit of an option, but it's also part of the story. So if you could think on how to put that into chart language so Jim could get it up, that'd be great.
I guess, my moving towards a more simultaneous learning model may be the solution to this problem. And we're making that move. And it seems like we're going to make that move. Does that work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Laura.
Was Deborah in front of me? Or was she?
No, you're before her.
Okay, super. This kind of talks to what Marty was just bringing up. My story is that some of the middle schools, or maybe one of the middle schools, were given access to a Zoom stream, so we didn't have the remote only classrooms and the inequities that existed in some of the other places. But also, this may be another bullet point, K-8, at least in our K, there were some discrepancies with remote learning at elementary and then remote learning in middle school.
Okay, I want you to go back to the first one and say it again. Remember both of them because we're going to put them both in, Laura, but say the first one again. One of the middle schools was given access to
Zoom streaming.
Okay, Zoom streaming.
I call it that instead of live streaming because that's what we did it through.
Okay, no, you're good. You're
Zoom
good.
Streaming, which eliminated the need for remote only.
Okay.
Trying to remember all the things. You're asking so much of me.
Sorry. I think that's what you had. And then the second one that you had was?
Were discrepancies between elementary and middle in K-8 buildings.
Discrepancies in what?
Between remote learning at elementary and remote learning in middle school. Elementary and middle, yep, in K-8 buildings. Such that middle school teachers were given access to different things than elementary was.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Appreciate you being patient with us. Debra.
Excuse me. So mine is kind of similar to Marty's. It doesn't go so much to class size discrepancies, but I think one of the things that happened with allowing parents to opt in anytime, they could then also opt out and go back and forth. And that caused some, I don't know how drastically it affected class size, but it did affect their teacher and getting them back oriented to the schedule. And 1 minute they're there and then special ed services can find them there. And we've had a couple of students that go back and forth, and it's just confusing and some extra work, not just on administration, but on all of the teachers that work with that student as well.
Okay. Okay. All right, I have Heather.
So I just wanted to add on to Marty's and Debra's, if I could, and just say that it's an issue also that I know about at elementary, not just middle.
Okay.
Which one was theirs, Heather?
The one that said at the middle school level, we surveyed parents and built our plans, but the parents are switching back and forth.
Okay. I've got Colleen, Allison, and Teresa. Colleen.
I kind of would need to piggyback on Laura's. Special populations at our school were allowed to do the Zoom in thing, and then we were given Go Guardian to try. But about the time we went back to remote is about the time our Go Guardian accounts got activated. So I never got to actually use Go Guardian. So when I get trained tomorrow, it'll be the first training, because I never actually got to use it. But we also have mixed teachers. Like I had 2 hybrid classes, 1 mixed and 1 remote. And my mixed was my honors classes, that special population where I had kids who were hybrid and kids who were remote all in the same room. And I just zoomed them in every day. So that was happening, and that eliminated having to change their schedules as well.
So would you put that in chart language, Colleen? Nice and short and succinct for Jim.
I know. I think for Lars, where it says one of the middle schools was given access to Zoom streaming. Special populations, you could do / special populations, because that's what happened. Our SPED teachers classes got to do that. Our co-taught classes got to do that, and our honors classes got to do that at our school.
Okay.
And then a separate one is some teachers have a complete mix. Like I have 2 hybrid classes. My honors classes has hybrid kids in it and remote kids in it. And then I have a strictly remote class as well. Oh, and we did a pilot on Go Guardian. That could be another bullet.
Okay, we'll have him do that as soon as he gets this one down. Okay, Allison.
So I guess it's kind of goes to what Colleen was just saying a little bit. So people who've been only remote have had kind of consistency with their learning model, but people who are doing this mix of like, I have this one hybrid, or like these 2 hybrid classes that are now fully remote versus this one class that was like always remote, have had a lot more turbulence of like doing this and then switching back and then doing this. So people who've been only remote have been very consistent versus like other people have had it change around a lot.
Okay. All right, Teresa.
Just to piggyback off of Allison in the consistency piece, you know, I know our counselors, and I'm going to speak just for North Glen Middle School, you know, we built our structure around our remote kids and then, our in-person students. And so we had a remote counselor. And so, of course, those numbers are not balanced. And, that counselor has built relationships with those students. And so just thinking, yes, about the equity between counselors, but also thinking about the kids and the relationships built. And I would say that's the same thing for teachers.
Okay. Okay. Dorman.
Teachers have been paid differently for the similar class loads.
Dorman, can I ask you to explain that to me?
Go ahead.
Yes. So there are situations where a teacher was paid for a 6th class, for instance, normally 5 classes and you're paid for a 6th class. And then let's say your student load is 170 to 180. And then their peer from another building, perhaps, because of these very legitimate instances that occurred, are teaching the exact same number of students at the rate of 5 classes.
Okay. Kristen.
So a couple of things that I can share from my building in terms of equity. When you think for K2, I have some in-person classrooms with 17 students who have 5 students going on a read plan. And I have a remote teacher with 35 students, half from Riverdale and half from another school, with 20 students going on a read plan. So there's a little inequity in terms of how much more work the teacher has with that size of class. And then I also have a teacher who has 35 students for remote, half from Riverdale and half from another school, who is working super hard to take students through the MTSS process that she's very concerned about, both at my school and at the other school, but there's a different process. And so we're not really aligned with that. And that's causing a lot of extra work as well.
Okay, Kristen, can you see the document that Jim's typing in?
Yes.
He's working on it. Can you add to what he's put down on the last bullet?
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate that. Sandy.
When we switched from remote to in-person and everybody's schedule changed, quite a few students from my CP biology, the advanced biology class, had to switch back into general biology because of the availability of that CP class in relation to other classes. And so some students missed out on their opportunity to be in an advanced class. And therefore, some of the general ed classes are bigger now. And my CP class is very small because some students had to be switched out and they didn't get switched back. So students are paying the price for unbalanced class sizes also.
Okay, Jim ended up typing in the middle of this next bullet, so I'm going to let him get caught up here a little bit.
Let me see if I did.
I'll give you a little bit of time, Jim.
You switch from remote to in-person.
Oh yeah, sorry. I wasn't even looking. Sorry, Jim. Some of my advanced biology students had to be switched out to a general ed class. And then we went back remote and they never got switched back. So the gen ed class is now really big. And my class, my advanced class is really small. So students are paying the price for unbalanced class sizes as well.
So a quick question for Dave and Mila. I'm getting confused. Are we doing class size in general? Or are we working more specifically at class size when we switch from one mode to another?
So when we, when one of the things that was when the decision was made to move back into remote to secondary, that the system was told we would address was that this group would talk about the fact that now we have two groups of teachers with different class sizes now teaching having this disparity between their class sizes. So it's really the issue was created because we went back into a remote setting. So you have general class sizes, not really the issue, nor is it necessarily for today, how big should remote classes be compared to in-person, but this conversation will spill over into our larger conversation about remote schooling for the future. Because, through part of this could come, what should that ratio be between in-person and remote eventually? What do we do when we have to switch types of learning models as we have had in this setting? So it's kind of a two-part conversation, really. One part, is that a problem that they're different? Which I think in general we say no, remote classes should be different. But how does this language about class size adjustment now play into the fact that we could have the same classes but have different sizes of them? And two, what do we do about the fact that because of the change in learning model, there's not a difference between the two? They're the same class now. They're both remote CP Chem classes.
Okay. All right, I've got Debra.
Marty's waving his hand at us.
Okay. Marty, did you have a question or do you have more question? Go ahead.
I guess, Dave, isn't there still a fundamental difference between a remote assigned teacher at this point in the fact that they could become, or a hybrid assigned teacher at this point, in the fact that they could, like, if we go back to hybrid, they're going to be required to come back. So I don't know that, I guess, I mean, changing the model happened, but does that change the job? Because it's temporary and it could switch at any moment.
I think that's a question more for the group than for me, to be honest with you. If I have my opinions or thoughts about that, but that's kind of what we have to decide, right? Like, is the fact that we switched for a couple of months but are going to try to go back in person, does that make a difference? Or should it make a difference? The reason why we bring things to this group is because like people like me and Mila and Chris and Kathy shouldn't just sit in a room and make the decision for everybody. That's what we have to decide, is the fact that it's a hopefully temporary changeover. Does that negate the fact that it's different? Or because we spent, what would it be, most of October and November, I can't keep my weeks straight anymore, but however number of weeks with 3 in person versus remote, right? Like, is that enough of a difference to mean that it's okay that they now have, even now they have the same job, but they might not? Is that enough, right? Like that's a conversation. That's why it's here, and not just me saying I think X, Y, Z.
All right, Debra.
So I kind of wanted to address something that Sandy brought up. Some of these class sizes going remote for special education services is creating an inequity in receiving their minutes. Some of the remote sped teachers that I've heard are very concerned that they can't meet all of their students' minutes. I know even going remote, all of my students aren't able to get their minutes, but they are at a much smaller percentage than some of the students who have gone remote. Did that make sense?
I think he's getting it down. Debra, take a look at it and see.
Okay.
Does that look right?
Yes, but there's even a bigger inequity between me going remote right now. Some of my students are only losing about 10 minutes a day of their minutes. But some of the students that went remote before we did, that chose the remote option, I know some students are losing quite a few minutes more. So yeah, there's just a little bit of an inequity. And if I go back in person, then okay, that balances back out. But the ones staying remote are losing a lot of what we determined they needed in order to be successful.
Okay. Okay. All right, I've got Allison, Marty, and then Colleen. Allison.
So this just something Marty just said. I kind of forgot about it, but a few weeks ago, like when we found out we were going back remote, I had people in my building approach me, kind of wondering what this whole conversation was going to be about, because like they had just been in person, and so they're like, me being in person, I was exposed to the virus. I was exposing my family to the virus. I was having to clean desks. I was having to do this hybrid model, and people who are fully remote didn't ever have to expose themselves in that way or take on these extra duties. So I think to me, like, it does matter whether or not somebody's fully remote and never had to set foot in a building, or whether they were being in building and remote teaching. Like, I think that is a part of the conversation that I feel like I kind of need to know about. And I think that a lot of people in my building were kind of concerned about that as well.
Okay. All right, Marty.
Another constraint in recreating the hybrid schedule and the remote schedule was accommodating teachers who either could not work in person or were extremely uncomfortable working in person. And so decisions were made and had to be made based on schedule to create the schedule to accommodate those. So that's it.
Okay. Okay. Colleen.
So part of the story, when we went to hybrid, there were a few days in there where we did not have all our students teaching synchronously, where remote teachers did. And then when we went back to remote, there were 2 days that we got to plan that those remote teachers were teaching synchronously those days. So there's like 4 days those remote teachers had to teach synchronously, where we got to plan or only see part of our kids if we were in person. And if you were mixed, whew.
I think I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Kathy.
So, not being in the classroom, I don't, is the feeling out there that things started out fairly equal based on how we started all remote? So we kind of had a good balance. And then when we made the transition to in-person, there were some inequities that resulted from that because you can't have as many kids in a class. And then switching back to remote made different inequities. Is there a possibility that people had a time where they benefited and then now they're doing like, was there a time where it was good and then we messed it up? But there's some people that when you look at like what happened where they went in person, they got a little break and then now they're paying more on the end. Like, I'm just trying to figure out like how this flow and if there's one story for every teacher, or if sometimes you kind of got a good break and then you got a bad break and then, or someone's always got the shaft. I'm sure there's not like a simple answer to that, but was it ever done where people did feel like we had the balance correct?
I don't know if there's a good answer to it, but 4 hands popped up really fast. So I've got Sandy, Colleen, Matt, Marty, and Dave.
Wow.
Sandy.
That really lit a fire under us, didn't it? Oh, Kathy. There's different perspectives to that. I think when we were online, the way I perceived from my members what they were saying, when we started online, they were relieved that we were online. But, we were struggling with this online thing that felt like the first time because it was so different than what we did in the spring, thank goodness. But when we went back in person, that's when everything in my building anyway went down the toilet in terms of climate and culture and fear and inequity. Because when we went back in person, that's where the class size inequity popped up. And that's when the fear popped up. From what I saw, when we were in person is when it all went bad. I'm not an AR anymore, so I don't know what my members are thinking now, but when we were in person, that's when it all went bad in lots of ways for us.
Colleen.
Remember at the beginning when I said I had no elephant? I think I lied, because when we went back in person, that's when a lot of things fell apart, because a lot of teachers felt like they weren't listened to. I think the model that you're going to in January is the model everybody wanted, because then kids who wanted to stay remote could have kept their schedule and still kept their teachers, because we could have done both. And so when it went to the in-person and remote teachers got new kids, we got new kids. Kids got new teachers, and then all these other things that felt inequitable, they came flying out of the corners, and it just, like, it was a big elephant for everybody that nobody really got to work out and massage and get rid of. But really, that's when it went out. And I think if we had done what we are going to do in January, it would have been a lot better for teachers and kids, and I'm looking forward to that in January.
Matt.
Yeah, I won't add a ton because people have said some things I've heard just across the district. But I think it kind of comes back to a basic idea that despite the fact that teachers are all technically teachers and all live under this same master agreement, no job is the same. There's always different inequities. Whether it's a special education teacher who might have a class of 10 students versus an AP teacher that has a class of 36. I'm just using a secondary. You never know what happens. Those things have happened for years and always will happen. Or if you have like an alternative school like mine where the classes are much smaller because every single student that we deal with is a high school dropout. And so you're just trying to corral them into having an education at all. There's always been these inequities, but they've been the same ones we've dealt with for years. And I think people have kind of just lived with them and they just know they happen. And then when everything is new for everybody this year. And just like I think Sandy, Colleen have both said, I think when choices had to be made, when we shifted at some point in September, there's definitely been grumbling since then because the inequities are different and they're new. So now, the biology class, it's not, usually I used to master schedule all the time. And so you do the best you could to keep all those biology classes as close as you could. But right now that wasn't as possible. And so that number became a flag for some people. But then it also, like I said, the safety concerns became huge for the other side of people. And frankly, there's definitely a lot of discourse among staff, I think, across the board. And that's not just Adams 12. That's there's things going on everywhere. And it's new. And so I think that shines a light on it. I do think, and second what Colleen says, if we can shift the model a little bit in the spring, I think there's a lot of potential there. I think something to add to story, I'd be careful about what sort of reactions or things we do right now moving into basically 3 weeks left of education before the winter break. We've got Thanksgiving break coming up and then just under 3 weeks after that before winter break. So I would just caution reactions and decisions that are made when the model could be changing.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Marty.
I don't have a lot more to add to what's been said, other than I also think another factor in making this difficult for not just teachers, but everybody that was in the building was when the relationships that teachers had built up over the first month of school and worked hard to do so were abandoned when we switched models because we had to change schedules. And so most teachers did not have the same students that they had for the first month or so of school. And so by doing that, I think that the other discrepancies in class size and other things also, were just compounded. So not only do I have to learn a bunch of new kids, I got to learn 40 instead of 20. And so I just think that was a compounding factor.
Okay. Dave.
So I have two things that I need to say. One, I think we need to be careful the way we use three words, or really two words, but like equity, equal, and trade-off, right? These three phrases, because nothing is ever equal, right? Like not, you can look at class numbers across it, it's never equal, right? And equity gets really hard to quantify. That becomes much more of a gut feeling, and it can it is inflammatory to use those two words. I like to think of everything that we deal with that you guys are talking about less in the space of equitable or equal, but in the world of trade-offs, right? So I have this schedule with this number of students. Maybe it's a smaller number of students, but the issues that I'm dealing with takes up more time. So the trade-off is this versus that. I have this trade-off because this part of my larger experience takes up more time than this part of my experience. All of it is trade-offs that we need to that have to be dealt with, and dealt with in a fair and reasonable manner. I think one of the things that created the issue, and not taking away anything everyone says, because everything everyone said is 100% accurate about the frustration and everything I've heard would just redouble everything you guys just said. But the thing that became problematic, which is why we wanted to potentially start with this conversation. We may not have a solution for it. This is IBS. I never think we're going to have a solution on day one of any of our questions or issues that we deal with. Is the fact that we went from having a trade-off where I'm in person, but maybe have less students, and this person's remote and maybe has more students, but they're not dealing with the same kind of safety concerns people were bringing up and other issues. But then when we switched models, then we moved to the space where everybody's doing, for the most part, the same job, but we didn't do it also in a way that we normally do. Our high schools and our elementary schools and our middle schools take months to build their master's schedule. With students in classrooms to make sure that all students' needs can be met in all the classes, so that, Kristen mentioned earlier about like read plans, right? We would never intentionally put the vast majority of our read plan students in one space, unless there was a specific reason. Maybe that's a co-taught class or something else. But like, we do everything very intentional. And a lot of that broke down during the remote 3 weeks. We had people saying that we had imbalanced caseload even during the remote period, because things were just so out of whack compared to the way we normally do. But then we moved into a class size issue, because now we're doing the same job, but it is now they're doing the same job now. So I think there's that larger component that we got to deal with of that space. And the long-term question will become, how do we deal with the fact, or should class sizes in the remote be different than they are in person? That's a long-term question that, as we stand up a permanent remote classroom, we need to get in a good place where we agree as a system that, yes, classes can be, I'm making up numbers, but 10% bigger, 20% bigger. I don't know what that number is, but that conversation is going to take a long time, and we're going to need a lot more information to be able to address a lot of those issues. But we just really need to be careful. And I know I'm pontificating a little bit, but because people throw around the equity and equal words all the time, and it's just really inflammatory. So just be really careful when I just asking you to be really careful when we use those words, and make sure we're actually meaning it, and not just talking about trade-offs, where this thing has a trade-off and that thing has a trade-off. We can disagree on that it's a trade-off or not, but there are some kind of trade-offs in that space.
All right, I have Allison and then Laura.
So a lot of what I was going to say was really covered, but I think the sad part of all of this kind of goes to what Sandy was saying of just the climate and culture of people who really used to be like a team of people are now like, you got this and I got this, and it's sad.
Okay. Laura.
Hi, sorry, I'm driving, so I'm gonna keep my video off so I don't make you nauseous. Back to what Kathy was saying about like, did we ever get it right? Did we ever do anything that made it better or worse or whatever? And what Dave was saying about the master schedule, when we put our students into our schedule in August, we cohorted them right away. Might be part of the story as well, but we cohorted them such that if we were going to go hybrid from our remote start, that all of the kids were already grouped in a class, and they were grouped by math class because that's the one that we differentiate the most, so that when the kids came into our rooms for hybrid learning, when we switched to that model, nothing changed and the kids stayed the same. So like what Marty was saying with making those connections, we didn't have to learn new kids' names and we didn't have to make new connections with any of the students. And then when we went to that hybrid model as well, kind of what Chris talked about originally was that 1/3 would stay home, 2/3 would come in, and then we split them by alphabet. And because we Zoom streamed and we kept all of our students, again, numbers didn't change, and we had that nice class size number. And then we didn't have that animosity between any of us, with like what Allison was talking about, where we were divided amongst, well, you have this many humans and you have, these humans, and we could take that sort of balcony view as opposed to the dance floor view and see that overview that was, we're all doing the best that we can, and we're trying to make this a really good situation. And it really was. And then when we went back to fully remote, I got to keep my students still, and we all have the 10 of us in the middle school all have similar numbers or similar student populations. And we also got to be a little bit more like a comprehensive middle school where the kids are chunked and they have similar teachers throughout. And so that was a really beautiful thing that we did get to do. So there is a little bit of positive somewhere for some people who need a little bit of positivity in this discussion. And my story was that we cohorted the students so that we didn't have to change or adjust when we switched models.
And I know, Laura, you can't see it, but I think Jim's got it. Kathy, you're not allowed to ask any more questions for the rest of the night. I'm kidding.
I was kind of wondering if I was gonna, you're just going to permanently mute me, but I do think it helps to understand the context, not being in the classroom or in the building. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm just teasing you, Kathy.
I know,
it's okay.
A little, as my mother would say, the greatest truths are spoken in jest.
Yep.
So yeah.
Very true. More story on this. Any other story? Any other story? Keep in mind, go ahead.
I don't have any story. I was keeping, because we were popcorning, there are a couple of people we haven't heard from. And so, I don't want to call them out, but I would want to, we traditionally try really hard to hear from everybody. And so I would love to hear story or thoughts from the folks we haven't heard from yet.
I agree, Dave. That's the one bad thing about doing this on Zoom is it's hard not to popcorn because you jump around on my screen all the time on here, and it's really hard to do that. But there are some folks that did not speak. If you would like to add story, please do so. Those of you who did not, or any other story from anybody, really. Heather.
Really everything I feel has been covered already. Oh goodness, I just forgot what I was going to say. I did think of something. I don't know. I know it's not on. I know we have thresholds, especially at the elementary level, of kind of cap those class sizes at, and I think it's just important important that we keep those in mind as we move into that remote space, that if you're not going to put 35 students pre-COVID in a classroom together at the elementary level, we probably shouldn't do the same thing in a remote setting. And then I know with the switch for our elementary going back to remote, and that contact hour looks very different for folks who were remote all along with their elementary students, and in-person people who are now switching to remote. Those hours are not the same with students. So again, we're doing the same job with the same kids, but we're having face-to-face minutes are very different. That would be all I would add.
All right, Chris. Oh, hang on just a second, Chris. I'm going to let Jim get this in, or somebody. Miley, I guess, is the one that's putting it in. Thank you. Okay, Chris.
So I just want to jump in and provide some story about the decision to shuffle kids into remote versus in-person sections versus doing the live streaming approach when we made that transition. And Bo may have further and more detailed insights than I do. In the conversations I was a part of, the why behind the approach we took was, number one, we didn't feel like we had the right tech tools to pull off live streaming. And you've heard that we'll be spending $2.5 million to do that. And hopefully we'll get a lot of that in time for second semester early on. But we didn't have the right stuff, both in terms of hardware like laptops and webcam cameras, nor did we feel like we had the right tools like GoGuardian, which, as Colleen mentioned, kind of came late in the game. Number two, we didn't feel like we had enough time to do the right PD for teachers to feel confident and prepare for that sort of approach in lieu of or in replacement of what they'd done before. And third, I heard that there were a number of educators who were really uncomfortable with that sort of approach and didn't want to have live streaming go on to their classroom where a parent at home might be observing their classroom practice and making critical conclusions about what they were doing or not. And that latter piece, I think, is still going to be an issue potentially for some staff members as we look at a different model. So that's just some of the why that may or may not be helpful in assessing past decisions and implications of that.
Okay. So like Dave, I try to keep track of who has not spoken, the ones that I have, and if I miss somebody, let me know. Heather Grecius, Linda, Nancy, and Mila have not put any input on the story. Do you have anything that any of the four of you would like to add? Go ahead, Heather.
I added to Marty's story.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Linda, Nancy, Mila, anything?
I don't have anything to add. My points have been represented by others.
Okay. Nancy?
I think I was just more interested in trying to understand the story, what actually happened, rather than being able to add to it at this point.
Thank you. Linda?
It's for those of us who aren't in the middle of it, it's a lot of information gathering and processing, and just wondering how in the heck this works so well.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Any other story that you have on this? And I'm going to ask you if you need a little break before we go into interests. Okay. I see some nodding heads. Yes. Oh, Dave, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah. The only thing I would want to put in on the story adds a little bit to what Chris was saying was, I don't know that our system would have been ready to go from to simultaneous instruction. That's the word that I'm supposed to use, Priscilla tells me. Simultaneous instruction model in August. A lot of districts in our area, this is the story part, a lot of districts in our area tried that And when I spoke to colleagues who are running that model from day one of the school year, starting in August, it was not successful, mostly for technical and training reasons, right? They didn't have the time, they didn't have the money or the resources yet to make it happen. And so it was not successful across the country and the state of Colorado, people who tried to do that in the beginning. There were pockets of successes, right? I think Laura's school is an example. There are examples in other districts where individual schools, teachers, or departments were there because they have the equipment and the training to do it. But a 52 site, or even if we just took half and said 20 site for our secondaries, that's a huge change. All of it. It was all a huge change, but we're one of the few districts that talking about putting that in instead of taking it out as an option, because we took time to be slow and deliberate and only do things at the pace that we had the capacity to do them well at.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Mila, for typing that in. Jim was setting up the interest. So let's take 10 minutes, get a breather, get up, walk around a little bit, and we'll come back and start into interests.
Hey, Dave.
Which Dave?
Much better.
Yes, ma'am.
Before we go into interest, would you just give a thumbnail sketch or description of what interests are for Kristen, our new member?
Absolutely. Yep.
I neglected to do that before we just dove right into the process. And
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I forgot as well. Thank you. I forget she's new.
I know, she just fits right in. Like
She does. Yeah, she does.
Mila, is there anything in particular I have to do for this group?
No, and I don't think we'll even be doing straw design tonight. We won't get to that this meeting. So, no, when it comes time, we'll, review all of this with everybody again, and I don't know, maybe you and I and Dave will meet offline and just talk about our webmaster responsibilities.
It'll actually be really easy, because you just go into it as a participant, right? Like, you have a separate link than the viewers. So viewers will have a link that will take them directly into just watching the panel, right? And so when you pop in, you'll pop into it. You'll have a Zoom link. You'll go into it just like any other. The only difference would be that you have to be the first one in so that you can start the meeting. And two, any of the viewers could theoretically communicate, like send you a chat if they so chose. But you can ignore them all you want.
Sounds good. Thanks.
So, Mila, question for you and Dave on your agenda. Do you want to hold to the 7:45 with the interest? We have about a half an hour for the interest, and then 7:45. You do want to determine the timelines on the subcommittees, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think we might need slightly more than 45. I was actually thinking about that, Mila. So I don't know if like 40 or 35, because we're not going to get all the way through this, and I don't know how long interests are going to take.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go to options yet, because we still need to get people that data sheet from Sarah Breitner and report on the face-to-face and everything like that before we can really go into options. So I want to be able to get that to people so they can absorb that in our in-between sessions. I think interest is a good thing to just start rattling around in our heads.
Okay.
But I wouldn't want to go into options until we have that large chunk of story that is still out there for folks.
So do you want me to cut it off at 7:35, or do you want to go to 7:45? What do you think, Dave?
I mean, I don't know that we're going to go all the way to 7:40 with interest. I think whenever interests play themselves out, we call it and move on to the next thing. And if somehow we end early, I'm not going to complain. I'm not holding my breath either, but I'm not going to complain.
All right. So
we never end early.
Dave, I was thinking during the break, Dave, that I don't have to popcorn these because I make a list for the check-in. I can just follow the list for the check-in and we go around the room. So I will start doing that. I wasn't thinking, so I will do that.
Dave, the other option just be start with somebody and go alphabetical, either reverse or forward alphabetically. Then they know who's coming up next.
That's pretty much what it does with the with the list that I have. Other than I start with new people each time, so Allison and Teresa don't have to be the first ones every single time. So, all right. Do you, Jim? Do you want to run the interest, or do you want to type?
Sure, my stubby finger is, the nerves endings are still growing, so they've grown enough tonight.
So you want me to type or you want to?
If you type, that'd be great.
That sounds good. So
Or you can.
I'm in a situation where I can, absolutely.
All right. So interest. We're going to talk about interest. Remember, that's the why you want to do this. What is there? What's driving you? It answers the question, why? I have an interest in. Does that help? Quick review?
Yeah, and we wanted to make sure that Kristen understood it because she's the new kid on the block. And so
Kristen, we'll go ahead and start with someone else. Finish up the table with you. And you'll be able to be the last person in the round robin to give us an interest, and we'll keep doing that around, okay? So Matt, I have you next for the first person to tell us about an interest.
Jim, I think I'm going to pass at this point.
All right. Mila.
It's hard to be the first ones out of the gate.
Isn't that the truth?
I have an interest in recognizing the differences in the varying roles that we're all playing.
I've got dinner rolls up there.
All right, Sandy.
I was just writing down trying to get them straight. I have an interest in balancing workload of my colleagues. Deb, did I steal yours? I saw you go.
Like word for word.
Linda, you're next.
I'm still learning. I'm going to pass.
All right. Let me go then to Allison.
Sandy stole mine too.
All right. Theresa.
I have an interest in not creating any more chaos.
Okay. Debra.
Well, Sandy stole mine.
Well, that's it.
It was just, I think I'm going to continue to wordsmith. I'll pass for now.
All right, Heather Espinoza.
I have an interest in remote class sizes not exceeding the good old days in-person thresholds.
All right. Colleen.
Sandy stole mine.
Chris.
I have an interest in restoring the collegiality, respect, and harmony between staff members within buildings.
Heather Gracious.
I'm going to pass for now.
Dormand.
Using some special education language, I have an interest in remote caseloads not exceeding old thresholds.
Nancy.
Well, to use a term already used, Chris stole mine.
All right. All right. Laura. Welcome back.
Thanks. I'm not at school anymore. I have an interest in other schools and other teachers having the opportunity to be as successful as we have been at my school. And there were 4 packages on my doorstep when I got home, PS, for the shopping thing, just saying.
Just real quick, mine was not exceeding old thresholds.
Thanks, Dorman. Oops, can't spell not either.
Dave.
I have an interest in a solution that does not have us play 52 card pickup again with our students.
Martin.
Dave stole mine.
Kathy.
I have an interest in teachers feeling that that teachers not feeling unequally burdened. I know that's a bad word, inequity, unequal, but I'm using it.
Jim, I don't know if you are watching the chat, but I think you missed Bo on your alphabetical list.
I think I did. Thank you very much. I'll come back to you, Bo. Kristen.
I have an interest in making sure that kids get what they need and having the best school experience possible. And I believe that when teachers feel respected and feel like their caseload isn't too overwhelming, or I also believe that when some classes have higher needs than others, then we may not be meeting the needs of all kids.
She did 3 and 1 there, so I put them all down.
Great. Thank you, David.
You're good, Kristen.
Bo, you thought deeply about this.
I was actually wondering about the appropriateness of the chat for calling someone out who was skipped. I'll have to have a sidebar with Mila about that. Instead of saying Chris stole mine, I'll riff off of his and say that I have an interest in solutions that strengthen bonds between staff and encourage ongoing collaboration and support versus anything that causes further dissent or tension.
All right. So Matt, back to you.
I have an interest in whatever is done being something that can hold true for this school year that doesn't have to potentially result in the 52 card pickup that was mentioned before.
Mila.
Yep, I think Matt has captured my idea of minimizing COVID disruption, so nothing to add.
Sandy. Sandy, you
You're
muted?
muted, Cindy.
Okay. I have an interest in getting teachers the appropriate technology they need to deliver online instruction.
Linda?
Pass.
Allison?
In addition to Sandy's, getting people the appropriate technology and assistance or training in order to deliver instruction in that way.
Teresa?
I have an interest of not rushing the process, so we could have an option that is thoughtful, strategic, and serves all parties positively.
Would you do that one more time? Not rushing the process, so you have.
Not rushing the process, so we can have an option that is thoughtful, strategic, and serves all parties positively.
Thank you, Teresa.
Debra?
I think this kind of plays off of Allison's. I have an interest in reducing some of the massive work hours that teachers are doing as part of all of this remote and hybrid. So I have an interest in reducing some of the massive work hours in this new model, whether that's around PD or tech support, or teachers are staying up until 10, 11 o'clock at night for a huge variety of reasons. And that would be my interest.
Heather Espinoza?
I'm trying to come up with a different word. Sorry, Dave, I can't.
No, you're good.
An interest in keeping FaceTime minutes equal or consistent when teaching and learning in the same model.
Bo, I won't skip you this time.
So I have an interest in recognizing that we have two models that are fundamentally different. And even though there are times that they intersect, there are moments where they won't. And why one has certainty to it, one has kind of ongoing uncertainty to it. And I think there has to be a recognition of how alike do we need to be, how different can we be, as we consider that two models are fundamentally different.
Colleen?
I have an interest in students getting a remote class size that allows the teacher to meet the needs of all the students in that class. So they get more than 2 minutes each.
Chris?
Pass.
Heather?
Sorry, I lost my cursor. I'm going to pass. Thank you.
Dorman?
Pass.
Nancy?
I think it's sort of been said, but I have an interest that we be cognizant of any negative way that we might affect students.
Laura.
Mine's kind of been said, but I have an interest in meeting both student and teacher needs in a way in which we don't increase teacher burnout. And of course, meet student needs, like everyone else said, but I didn't want to add that too.
Dave.
I have an interest in a solution that is long lasting. And I need to explain that a bit. I don't think that this conversation ends when this pandemic is over. We now have remote classes. We now have a model that we may be moving classes in and out of remote. I don't know, but we need I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm kind of riffing. Maybe I'm tired, but we can have to answer this question in a way that can be used as a model for how we deal with this disparity or these trade-offs in the future.
Marty.
I have an interest in seeing whether the shift to a simultaneous model relieves these problems without the need for contract language change.
Kathy.
Pass.
Kristen, back to you.
Pass.
Matt.
I'll pass.
I'll pass. I wonder if now's not the time to popcorn.
Yeah. If you have one, raise your hand, Allison.
So this is kind of going what Dave and Bo both said, but I have an interest in more clearly defining the expectations of what remote learning should look like versus being in a classroom.
Dorman.
I have an interest in creating a framework that allows remote learning to be different, effective, and unique for the future.
Anyone else have one? I don't see any other hands up. All right. So we talked about taking a pause here. And and finish moving on to the next item in the agenda. We'll come back when this is put back on the agenda, review what we've had, and then start moving into options after that.
Just as a reminder, the face-to-face report should be out when we come back from Thanksgiving break, which will have all the class size information. When you get that, if you could take a look at it, we'll enter it into a story when it's appropriate at our next time this is brought up. But everyone will get that in their hands, and I'll make sure Nancy, you and Linda can get a copy of it as well. Everyone else will just get it sent to them, but I'll make sure you guys get a copy of it as well.
Chris.
So the question I have for the group that I think will help inform option development when that time comes. I've just been trying to figure out from the perception of staff in the system, is the risk of being in an in-person environment and potentially exposed to coronavirus, maybe having some cleaning obligations that you take on, a commute to your work site on a daily or close to daily basis, does that carry the same weight? Is it basically a fair trade to say those things carry similar sort of concern or value, and that it balances out the greater class size that comes for a teacher in the remote setting? Like, is that a one-to-one trade in terms of the risk factors and the cleaning pieces against having a bigger class size? Because I heard a lot of that in those competing parts of the story. I just would love to hear more perspective, and maybe it's going back to story about how you feel like colleagues weigh those two things, because it's easy to just put them on the chart paper, but are they equal, or is one given more weight by colleagues, or does the weight attach based on whether you're in person or remote, and how you are analyzing that?
Allison and Sandy both have their hands up, so we'll start with Allison.
I would say that given like it's the same as everything, that we have diversity among staff, and so you're going to get like the same thing of, you know, some people wanted to go back and some people didn't. And I would say there in my building, I've actually heard from people that they feel 100% that is a trade-off, and that they feel like it balances out and everything is fine. And I would say there are other people who would say absolutely not, that's not fair at all. So I don't think you're going to get an answer like that clean cut, but it would be really nice.
Sandy and then Dave.
What people were, well, the people that I heard from when we were in person about, and I'm still going to use the word inequities because that's how they were putting it, was, well, we're being told like, we better be here. Our contract time starts at 7:30. So we better be here at 7:30. But people who are remote, you know, they're not being watched over, and like they're eating breakfast with their kids at 7:30. So maybe they're not, and they have first hour plan. And so it's not fair. And oh, I have lunch duty since I'm here in person, and people at home don't have to do that. And it's not fair. And those are the kinds of things I was hearing. From my perspective, what I saw at my school and what people would come to me about was that I don't know if there is a trade-off. The people that were remote and had these giant class sizes were just as upset about that as people were that were in the building about lunch duty and being nagged about contract time. And I don't know if it's a trade-off. I don't know.
Dave.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Sandy said, I mean, I think this wouldn't be an issue the way it is right now had we not transitioned to all those folks now doing the same job again. That's where I think the issue is created. You know, we spent a lot of time wondering, was there going to be, were the trade-offs one-to-one, were they worth it? Where did those trade-offs land? And, you know, the decision that I and others kind of found ourselves in, similar to, I think Matt said something to this, but like everything is so new, I can't tell you if it's a trade-off yet. We've done it for a quarter, a semester now, not quite a semester now. Do we know it's a trade-off or not? I don't think anyone can answer that question accurately right now, because we're just not there yet, which is why I wouldn't have necessarily highlighted this as an issue that needed to be dealt with right now. I would have highlighted it as an issue that we needed to develop as part of this longer ongoing conversation about what remote education and the contract and working conditions and whatnot needed to be moving forward. But we needed more time to figure that out. Was it a trade-off? Was it not? What was that sweet spot? I don't think anyone knows what it is, personally. I think there's lots of opinions, but mostly it's one person's opinion compared to, and looking at someone else saying, your job is easier, or your job is harder, or my job is harder. And that happens all the time in my work, where someone points to someone else's job and says, your job is harder, even though they haven't walked a mile in that person's shoes and doesn't know that that job is harder or easier, or the trade-offs are equal or not equal. I think we'll know at some point this school year. But I think the issue is created because it's no longer a trade-off. There are no trade-offs because everyone's doing the same job, as long as secondary and our elementary colleagues are all remote. The longer we stay in this space, the greater the issue becomes because of the class size imbalance with some classes, right? With some people, it will be total caseloads imbalanced. Some people, it'll be, I got 40 persons in this class, but I got 12 in my in-person class, so it's a wash. It's all over the place. But this issue is created because we're all doing the same job right now.
Debra.
Yeah, I guess, Chris, people in my building had a different complaint. It wasn't about workload per se that upset them about the 2 different or 4 different types of learning. It was more about the inequity about health. The majority of the people that came to me were concerned that how come we are in a classroom with masks off and kids eating, but we can't go into the office. And the office was completely sealed off. And so those 5 people didn't have to deal with anybody else, but classroom teachers were in a classroom with students eating lunch, and special ed teachers and ELD teachers and specials teachers were seeing 130 kids. And so how come we weren't as protected as others? Those were the kinds of arguments that the feelings of injustice that angered a lot of my teachers. I think, I heard some grumblings about, Colleen brought it up, teachers that were already remote didn't get 2 planned days, but teachers that were switching, some of those things came up. Speaking for myself, the fact that I can teach in my slippers and I don't have to drive a half an hour commute is lovely, but it does not, I would much rather be in person. Dealing with the technology ain't my thing, and it doesn't outweigh it, speaking for me personally. So, but those were not the issues that came up in my building. They were more how come my life is worth less than your life? That was kind of the issue that came up that I heard a lot of.
All right, I don't see any other hands up. So are we ready to move to the determined timelines for subcommittees?
Sure.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, and what do you want to do there, Mila?
Well, Dave, I added some bullets back to the agenda for tonight that's in our shared drive. And as we did some planning, Jim, Dave, and I, we've attempted to map out the next meetings for the year and to think about the work And we thought about some of these ongoing charges that are out there for subcommittee work. And I think I've got them all here, Dave. The specials, elementary specials subcommittee, the comp committee with its 3 branches: teacher leadership, incentives, and the intermediate salary steps. Last year we focused on CTE, but that's really an intermediate salary step subgroup. And then special education planning time was something that emerged last year out of our planning time conversations as a need to look at that next year. So those are some ongoing charges that we wanted to chat with you about. How urgently do those need to be addressed? Is it this year? Can they be pushed to next year? You know, we're operating in this compressed timeline with these evening only meetings, really trying to stay off of any school day conflict, just for all the reasons we know, having to do with sub shortages and the difficulty of class coverage and all of that. So we just wanted to chat a little bit about that. Dave, what would you add?
You know, the only thing I would add in this space is, you know, we do have limited amounts of times and resources, and we wanted to have this conversation with you guys now instead of coming to you in April saying, oh, by the way, Dave and Mila didn't pull these committees together this year. Our bad, right? We wanted to make sure that if you felt like the charges of any of these committees should be or needed to be done this year, that we could make sure that we had the time necessary to do that work. And I don't know if folks would want us to go through the specific charges of those committees so that they know what we had initially asked them to do in these school years. So
I think that would be good, Dave, to just review that for the group.
Okay. So with the specials committee, what their job is to charge is to continue to monitor the allocation for specials teachers per section. We've made adjustments the last couple of years, but to monitor and determine whether or not those specials formulas are appropriate, or allocation formulas are appropriate for this year. And then with the comp committee, this one's the big one. So the 3 parts to that charge is to define the teacher leadership position, including considerations of co-curricular, athletics, and other department leadership. 2, to research and make recommendations regarding incentive pay for highly impacted schools. 4, continue to research and make recommendations regarding removing the master's degree requirement on certified salary schedules and recognition of alternative educational equivalents, such as professional development. That was a big breath I need to take. And then make recommendations to clarify and streamline the process and protocol for Article 21 intermediate salary steps. So those were the 4 charges we gave the comp committee. And then the special education planning was the piece that came out of our education or our elementary planning work last year. And it was teaching planning time is essential for creating classroom environments that best meet the needs of students, and unique planning needs of special education in elementary schools require further research and development. During the 2021 school year, district and association shall form a study committee to make recommendations regarding the definition of planning time for special education educators and the appropriate amounts of structures of plan time for special educators in special education educators in elementary schools. Those were the charges of those committees that we came up with from last year.
And I think I would add that the specials staffing committee, if the charge is to monitor the staffing formula, then the work is to make recommendations and to analyze where it's working and not working, and to come back with recommendations for further adjustments. So,
if necessary.
Yeah.
Dorman.
Oh, my mic is still open. For me, the compensation committee, I mean, things are really up in the air and in flux and all of that. I mean, I just don't think it would be a good use of our time to really push on that this year. Personally, I think we need to wait to see how some things shake out. Maybe just redo a date and ask that committee to start up in the next year. That's just my opinion.
Other comments? Nancy.
Well, and I was going to say, given the uniqueness of this year, the charge for the elementary staffing, special staffing, it's going to be kind of tough to monitor it since it's so different. So whether that could be put off for another year might be possible.
Other comments? Sandy.
As far as compensation committee, I mean, what I'm thinking is that if we don't have it, then, you know, the budget goes way far sideways. Then it could be, members could perceive that as, oh, well, you guys didn't think it was important enough to have all that extra information to, you know, talk about salary schedule, steps, lanes, and all that. I think the compensation committee, the charge might look a little different for that committee, but I think it needs to stay.
Just as a reminder, steps and lanes and that kind of stuff, tradition for the regular compensation package has never been a charge of the compensation committee. It's a funky name. We used to call it strategic compensation and all this other stuff. But it's really to look at things outside of steps and COLAs and that kind of components. We've never used it to discuss, except for when we read at the salary schedule, to discuss what like a COLA or a step would do to people's salary schedules.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's what I'm thinking back about is when we redid the salary schedule. Thanks.
Other comments? Heather, gracious.
So as far as the special ed planning committee, I do think that it's super important work. I am a bit hesitant to move forward with that right now, just because of the immense load that is falling on special educators right now and all educators. I think, like I said, it's important, but I do think that it could be punted to a time that works better, even over the summer. Maybe we just go off calendar a little bit.
Other comments? Sandy, your hand's still up. Did you have more? Okay.
Just took it down.
Okay, thanks. Mila.
I would agree with the point made about the compensation committee work, the special projects and the application of funds to different areas is problematic in my opinion right now, just given all the other uncertainties. But there is one little part of that which has to do with the intermediate salary steps in Article 21 and how we define those. We did some work last year, as you recall, on defining ways that CTE teachers could earn credits and advance horizontally across the salary schedule. And there's some cleanup that I believe would be helpful and useful. The rest of Article 21 having to do with the intermediate hours board and just the way they're granting credit and just looking at that process. I don't think it requires an influx of funding, it's really more a clarification and a streamlining of an old process. And so while I think workloads are really intense and heavy, I do think that that's one little thing that we felt like we had a little capacity to have a subgroup looking at that and coming back with a recommendation for this group could be really useful and timely given the changes we made last year to CTE, but I'm open to other opinion about that.
Dave.
I was going to say something similar that, between the IHB committee and some work already done, a good part of the work of that is already kind of underway. So that would be much less of a lift on the committee. Anyone we would pull together to work on that this year. And so I think that is something in a little bit more accomplishable. Those words did not come out right. Just because that's been ongoing work and a project that's been going on for a while. I think that's a good spot. I agree with some of the others people's about some of these monitoring and reporting spaces. How could we monitor anything happening right now and say that it's anything like normal? With allocations and specials, is it working? Is it not working? It's just all over the place. And so that was kind of where my personal gut was to kind of to set aside some of these things, with one other exception. I do think part of that teacher leadership group, one of that charges was that we did need to have a job description created by Learning Services per the contract for department chairs and that kind of stuff. And so although it may not be compensation work, that is something that I still think should be created and should be brought, not necessarily for our veto or whatever, just because it's not necessarily negotiated, but it was something that was highlighted last year as something that should and supposed to have been done and hasn't been done for a while.
Marty.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the same thing Dave did about the leadership portion, specifically about the department heads. I think we do. I think that's work we could accomplish this year, and I don't see a reason why we wouldn't, because it doesn't require additional funds to solve.
Other comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So Mila, Dave, what do you need to do with this?
So I guess I would say I would make a proposal, and I would want to, it's not really a consensus because we're not really taking a vote, but at least make sure everyone is on board with a plan, which would be to hold off doing any work on special education planning until maybe the spring, moving into the summer, so that maybe next year we have something for us. With the elementary staffing, same thing. Hold off on making any recommendations this year in that space. And then with the comp committee, holding off on everything except the Article 21 intermediate steps that's already started, and the department chair job description. Holding off on the rest of the work in that bucket.
Okay. And Mila's typing this in as we're speaking, so.
Yeah, so I suppose if once you see my the various places that have holds, in case you're visual, then maybe Dave and Jim, if you might just take a temperature
check. Okay.
Agreement on the direction that we've recommended.
All right. So what if you look at the elementary staffing committee? She's got a hold until next year. Comp committee, go ahead with the teacher leadership, hold on incentives, hold on MA salary schedule, and then Article 21, continue the work. And then with the the SPED staff hold till late spring, summer. All right. Any other comments before I take the temperature check? All right, let me see your thumbs. All right, your temperature check is consensus, so that's what you're going to do. All right, anything else for the good of the order tonight?
We accomplished the agenda according to our timeline. I just would like you all to go mark your calendar.
Yes. All right, so we're going to do a checkout, just a thought for the day, and we're going to start with Chris.
I just appreciate the honesty and the respect and the willingness to listen to one another. I thought it was a really good night, and just respect you all and appreciate you very much.
Oh.
Always hard to follow Chris, so I'll just say he stole mine.
Colleen.
It's a great way to start the season.
Heather Espinoza. Oh, she's en route.
I am en route, but thank you, everyone. Good conversation, good information.
Debra.
Yeah, what a great kickoff. We got through the agenda, lots of information. I love being back with this team. I learned so much. It's thoughtful. I appreciate it.
Teresa.
Did you say Teresa?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
not the way you said it. You say it much better than I do, but I tried.
I just wanted to make sure. I just think this is a great group, and I always learn a lot more from each of you. And so thank you. And I hope you all have a good night and a happy Thanksgiving.
Allison.
Yeah, this was great. Sorry again that I was late and flustered at the beginning, but I just appreciate how everyone can kind of say their piece and be listened to and be heard, and like so many different perspectives are in this room, and I feel like every voice is valued, and I just appreciate the work that everyone is doing in this like incredibly challenging time.
Mila.
That was not alphabetical, Dave.
I know, I'm going backwards.
I appreciate all of you. Welcome back to a new year. It's always a good learning experience to be with you all. And yeah, I echo the happy Thanksgiving thought. Our next meeting will be December 17th, right in the middle of Hanukkah. Sorry, Laura, I was so trying for all of our members, Deborah, to get out of Hanukkah, but just couldn't do it. So,
Matt.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being able to provide listening ears tonight and valuable input, even though I know everybody's running ragged. Just appreciation to all the people in the system at all levels. Have a good one.
Sandy.
Kathy, I appreciate you asking questions and just expressing to us that you really wanted to know, and I also appreciate that this group feels like a safe place to answer those questions honestly. Chris, I appreciate your candor. And I'm not glad you're frustrated, but hearing you be frustrated just makes me feel like you understand and have been listening to where we're coming from. So I really appreciate that too. Thank you to the whole group. I love being here with you guys.
Linda.
Although I didn't have much to offer in terms of story and interest, I appreciate the willingness and the risks that people take in sharing some of their concerns and their feelings. So it's always a good group to work with, and I look forward to next time.
Kristen.
Nice job, everyone. It's a privilege to be working with you, and I hope you all have a happy Thanksgiving.
Dorman.
Ustedes son increíbles. Nos vemos en la próxima. You guys are incredible. I'll see you in the next one.
Nancy.
I am so impressed with all of the work that you guys are doing and how well you're doing it. And the other thing that I'm impressed with is how beautifully you represent all the different perspectives. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Laura Leppy.
I forgot how much I like all of you. This was really good for me. This was very soothing for my soul. And I love how respectful everyone is with the differing opinions. And it is very apparent how hard everyone is working and all the aspects and everybody, whether you're in the classroom or not, and no matter what level you're at. So that's been really awesome. And P.S. I thought the next meeting was December 8th and not December 17th. So I might have that wrong, but happy Thanksgiving and Hanukkah if it's not till the 17th.
Dave.
So I would like just to pause and take a step out of IBS and say this is American Education Week. It's where there's national this day and national that day. Well, this is the week of the year where we celebrate the entire educational system, from students to parents to community to teachers, principals, the entire system of education, because I think it's so important that it really is a system and it is a team in order to educate our community, to educate each and every student, because it's not one person, it's not one group, it's everybody. And this group really exemplifies that every single day. And so thank you for being on this team. And also just thank you for everything you do every single day to make our community and our world a better place. People can't thank you in person right now, so this Zoom thank you is as good as it's going to have to be. But know that from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you on behalf of my kids, my family, my community, everybody I know.
Kathy.
I just was going to say thank you for answering my questions. And Sandy, I'm glad you like them. I appreciate coming into a group. I mean, I think both Laura and I have the true outsider perspective, right? All of you work in education, whether you're in the admin side or the teacher side, and we're like the, parent people, and, we have a role, but we're not in the trenches every day. And so I just appreciate truly having you all, to answer questions honestly. And you all just put your heart and soul, and we're so lucky to have each and every one of you serving our kids. So thank you.
Marty.
Well, it was nice to see everybody. I would prefer it to be not virtual, but I'm going to take whatever I can get at this point. And I think that all of us who are in education have been feeling some sense of loss about what could have been, or the opportunities we're missing with students, and the things that we had planned for this year. And so it's been helpful for me to really focus on gratitude, because it's hard to despair if you're feeling gratitude. And this is a group that I'm grateful for, and I hope that you really enjoy your time off. It's well deserved.
Heather Gracious.
So like Marty, I do like to spend my time thinking about what I'm thankful for, rather than, what's wrong with society or whatever. And just leaving this election season, I'm reminded that good does exist, and people do have the ability to problem solve in appropriate ways and listen and learn from one another. So I just think that in 2024, we should nominate Gadowski for president, and we'll all be good.
Yeah. Jim, top
I
that
second.
one. Jim.
I wouldn't try to top that one. It was great. I would note though, and I hope you did, that the stress and frustration during the meeting seemed to go down. You seem to be less stressed and less frustrated as you move through the meeting. I hope that's true. And I hope it continues to go down until tomorrow morning when you go to work. And I hope it doesn't go up tomorrow. I feel terrible because many of the problems you encounter every day, you did not have any idea you were going to work with that problem when you walked through the school door or your office door. It's stressful. I appreciate that. It's frustrating. I appreciate that. And I wish all the best to you. And I hope you get very skilled at not letting the stress and frustration get to you. Thank you for the work you do.
And I'll just ditto what Jim just said. You guys get in a groove, and it just amazes me. You're so respectful of each other. You work so hard, and same just what Jim said. Thank you guys so much for everything you do for our kids. See you on the 17th.